Welcome to the Jamal Thomas Morning Show. My name is Jamal Thomas. This is my show. Can't necessarily happen without you, so you can say on some level it's our show. I hope you guys are doing okay this morning. Monday mornings are a difficult thing. I could be wrong, but if I'm not mistaken, more people die Monday mornings than anywhere else. And I could be lying through my teeth on that, so do not take that as a fact or anything like that. But no, I'm glad that you guys can enjoy me. Obviously, I'm at a new location. My picture looks blurry, at the very least from here. Let me know if you guys hear me okay, and if you guys can see me okay before I start. I don't want to go 40 minutes in. And, it's like, dude, we can't hear you. Bank holiday on Monday here in the UK. Well, good for bankers, I suppose. Hi, Jamal. Saw you fighting with Ritter on Twitter. Why are you guys fighting? I'm not fighting with Ritter on Twitter. Wait, I'm not fighting with Ritter on Twitter. I'm not fighting with Ritter on Twitter. That was something that was said months ago. Just kind of is what it is. I'm in Indonesia, Charles. I'm in Indonesia. And I will be here for the next 2 months. It will be a slight culture shock. Kind of like being in Vietnam, but so far so good. No, not fighting with Ritter. I haven't said a word to Ritter. I know people. Look, me disagreeing with somebody, it's not me saying anything about them personally. It's just me disagreeing. And if I think somebody is gone off the rails, especially in the independent media space, where I think they're trying to create a narrative that suits what I consider to be their ends, I have every right, just like anybody else has every right, put a knife in that person and point out my issue. I said nothing about him individually. So there's that. There's a storm going outside, so I'm hoping that's not translated. Also, this is the time for prayers. So I hope that's also not translating, even though I actually enjoy that part. Let's get into some news. Shout out to the chat. Shout out to all the early morning risers who are here. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being here. You help makes the show what it is, and honestly, without your support, couldn't do a show. So there's that. Interesting news. So peace president Donald Trump seems to be prepping for wars all across the globe. It is a wide belief that an attack on Iran is imminent, so much so that you can hear the Iranians getting very loud about this. There's a wide belief that an attack on Venezuela is imminent under the pretext of not considering Venezuela a legitimate government and under the pretext that it's a drug cartel. Even though Trump has already said supposedly that he stopped drugs from coming into the country, he is now talking about attacking a country that has done nothing to us and has sent 3 warships to the coast of Venezuela. Maduro has raised like a 4.5 million militia. But I'm very curious on what Latin American countries are going to do with this. For all intents and purposes, you are an attack on a country that is innocent, that you don't particularly like, and that you may have taken issues with because they've formed relationships with Russia and also China. Not to mention the oil. It's always the oil, right? So there is that. Trump has allowed and sold cruise missiles to Ukraine. There's that. Apparently, they can't use those cruise missiles without Donald Trump's support, but selling them nonetheless. Europe apparently buying them and paying a 10% markup on the weapons that are being sold to Ukraine. That is humiliating. Deeply, deeply humiliating. But vassal state is a vassal state. What's even wilder about this, Merz, Germany's prime minister, chancellor, came out and said, we can no longer afford a welfare state. Think about that. You're spending money hand over fist, sending weapons into a war that is fundamentally lost. And you are also standing up telling the German population the standard of life that you have typically lived, we can no longer afford to supply that standard of life. That is amazing. And I'm super curious on how long Mertz is going to be able to stay in office after saying some nonsense like that while continuously buying weapons from the US to give to Ukraine with a 10% markup that the US not just outed the 10% markup, but just stumped the stupidity of Europe for giving them extra money on those weapons. But we can't afford to live, We can't afford to provide your healthcare and your education and your spa vacations every couple of years. We can't do that. We have to send weapons to Ukraine. Good luck with that. Good luck with that. Good luck with that. Contrary to this, to what I just said about Trump sending missiles, it is also being reported that the U.S. had prevented Ukraine from using Attack Adams missiles against Russia, basically forbade them from doing so. That's pretty wild. It's almost as if Trump is doing two things at once. There's that. I hear a buzz. My guest is here, and I want to go to my guest. I hate leaving my guest waiting. So I'm going to bring him in. He's a bit early, but that's okay. We are joined with the man himself, Tim Anderson. How you doing, Tim? You doing okay this morning? I'm sorry, tonight.
Yeah, it's evening here, yeah. I don't know what time it is where you are.
You are 3 hours ahead of me. I'm in Indonesia.
Okay.
Yeah, it's late here too. When I was in Malaysia, it was always 2 hours. So I used to feel your pain more. But I do appreciate you being up this late, and I do appreciate you joining me. Thank you for this. Honestly.
No problem. My pleasure. Always a pleasure to talk to you.
I want to. There are a few stories some that you sent and some that I have. One that I am super interested in, and I guess there are two that I'm super interested in. Let's start with this right here. Let's start with ISIS. Because this is going to fold into one of your stories also. UN flags ISIS expansion in Syria, Iraq, and Africa with new tactics. Well, that's interesting. So you get a situation where the United States shakes hands with terrorists, functional leader of ISIS at the time, who now is running Syria. That guy is apparently making deals and agreements with Israel. There's that. And yet, we're shocked that there's some kind of expansion of ISIS in the Middle East. Here's another story that came out. So, right here. And you can correct me if I'm getting this particular story wrong. Al-Jilani apparently has made some kind of agreement with Israel. I don't know how his government maintains itself after these agreements, but okay. Preventing reconstruction of the Syrian army, establishment of humanitarian corridor towards Sweda, disarming Syrian section of the Golan Heights. This is according to Channel 12 in Israel. Question, are these things related to one another? This notion of there's an expansion of ISIS while simultaneously the U.S. effectively backing the Hadi government who's run by the former leader of ISIS.
Look, those of us that were studying the war in Syria over many, many years came to the conclusion fairly early on that the US was the main sponsor of ISIS. The whole idea of a war on terror and that the US was going into Iraq and into Syria and into a number of North African countries to fight terrorism was entirely false, entirely fabricated. The ISIS, the ideology of it is Salafi Wahhabi from the Persian Gulf, from the Saudis basically, and some of the other monarchies, Arab monarchies in the Persian Gulf. But the parallel groups in North Africa, Boko Haram and Al-Shabaab, are very similar and funded by the same US allies basically, and they provide a pretext for the US and in some parts for France to go in and say, we are here to help you fight terrorism. And this includes in Somalia and Sudan and other places too, as well as West Africa. So this has been the US pretext for going through West Asia or the Middle East and now North Africa too, and with their NATO allies, trying to secure the resources of those and secure exclusive access to the resources of those regions. They could buy them before. They could have bought oil from Saddam Hussein too, but they don't like that. They want to have complete control and get rid of any wild cards and any independent characters there. Although Saddam himself was a collaborator with the US from early days, from the early 70s, basically. But so ISIS, shouldn't be a surprise to see that the US got what it wanted in Syria after many, many years, and despite many, many sacrifices by the real Syrian Arab Army, which represented a pluralist state. There, they've got a guy who's been a senior commander of ISIS and Jabhat al-Nusra and HTS, which are all banned, by the way, still to this day by the UN Security Council. Never mind what Washington does. Basically, the Russians and the Chinese and the others are not going to quickly give up that tag there. So we've got the US and its NATO hangers-on coming along and fighting this guy, and the petro monarchies of the Persian Gulf coming along and starting to invest finally in Syria, which they wouldn't do under Assad because of all the demonization and so on, and the conditions that the US placed on relations with Syria during that time. And they were trying to starve Syria into submission. Eventually, they corrupted the commanders of the army, and they've got a guy, a genuine Al-Qaeda guy, in charge there. And the problem is, you would think this would cause some problems for the US interventions in other parts of the world. And apparently the US is on the road towards moving out of Iraq. They know the Iraqis don't want them. They've been there under that pretext. They were actually invited by the Iraqis back in 2014 when ISIS was about to take over large parts of the country. They were never invited into Syria, but they went in there anyway. And the government of my country went in there too. And I actually documented, amongst other things, direct US and Australian Air Force intervention to help ISIS in eastern Syria back in 2016. Not just indirect support, direct support. And of course, if you go to Iraq and talk to the people there, the people who were actually fighting ISIS in Iraq, the young men that were mobilized by their own country under a religious edict back in 2014, created these popular mobilization units. They say the US military actually obstructed them in liberating the city of Mosul, for example, which has an ancient Christian population. So there was never really any serious, despite all the rhetoric from Obama and from Trump and Biden and the others, there was never any serious US effort in fighting ISIS. They were supporting ISIS to divide and conquer the region, basically to divide the forces in Iraq. Originally, the idea was set up under Bush II, basically, because after the destruction of the Saddam Hussein regime in Iraq, the US was, let's say, the deep state with the great continuity that it has through all the different changes of government in Washington, was very concerned that Iraq might get close to Iran, because after all, Iraq is majority Shia and Iran even more so. And of course, that was what was happening. So the US has maintained its occupation in Iraq for after a withdrawal, a temporary withdrawal in 2011. They came back 2014, another more than decade of occupation to try and poison the relations between Iraq and Iran, those that should be good neighbors, basically. And of course, for a while under the Assad government, Iraq had very good relationships with Syria. Now the Iraqis are horrified what's gone on in Syria. They're worried about it because they've fought these guys. They've thought they were going to be taken over by ISIS and the other similar ideology groups, Al-Qaeda groups, basically, with Salafi Wahhabi ideology. They fought them. They defeated them in Iraq. They're trying to get rid of the US military still, and they're very worried that what's happened in Syria may pass across to Iraq. But as I said, this is a phenomenon that you see from the northeast of Africa across to West Africa too. Still, it's a scam. It's a game that's been played to get the US and other NATO forces into those regions and try and seize control of their resources. That's the big picture going on there now. So we shouldn't be surprised to see that this UN report, the first post you referred to, was based on a UN report saying that the ISIS is expanding in the region again, and helped by the fact that effectively ISIS and its allies are in charge in Damascus now, and having very good relationships with the Israelis. Let's remember, ISIS never attacked Israel, even though there was this mythology about being against the West and there were some let's say supposed executions of North Americans, but they never fired a missile the Israelis, except by mistake on one occasion. They apologized when a missile went into the Jolan, the occupied Jolan, basically. So they really have had to this day, and now through the Jolani regime in Damascus, not to be confused with the Jolan Heights, they've got this very accommodating relationship with the Israelis, to the point that they've now let the Israelis occupy most of South Syria, up to the point where the Israelis are in a position now where if they want to, they can go and attack Lebanon, try and invade Lebanon from the eastern side, which they probably want to do because they believe that there are Hezbollah forces in the Bekaa Valley. And wouldn't you know it, that the Jolani, the Al-Qaeda leader in Damascus now, has said to Israel many times, our enemies are the same as you, Hezbollah and Iran. So now the board is set for an expansion of the Israeli forces with the help of ISIS and other Al-Qaeda factions that the US has been fomenting for many, many years in that region. It's a tragedy for the Syrian people. It's a big tragedy for the Lebanese people. Now they're going to have to fight Israeli troops as well as Al-Qaeda groups on their eastern flank, and the Iraqis are worried it's going to affect them too.
Are the Iraqis right to worry about this? I had a friend of mine that just came from Iraq, and she pointed out that they're watching these events as they take place, but there is concern that this is going to spread into Iraq also. So is it fair to say you're expecting Israel and Syria Israel and the Wahhabis, these gangs of thugs that are effectively called the Syrian military, that they're going to also assist Israel in attacks on Lebanon, I guess on both sides, one from the south, one from the north?
Well, their first priority, I think, is Hezbollah in Lebanon, and they've said that many times, and they've lined up the foreign fighters. You know, they have a lot of, they're not just Syrians there, there's a lot from Chechnya and the East Turkestan guys from Xinjiang in China, and the Albanians and so on. There are many, many thousands, tens of thousands of foreign fighters in Syria now under the command of Jolani's regime. And their first priority is to attack Hezbollah, basically, because let's remember, Hezbollah and Iran were helping the Assad government fight terrorism in Syria, fight ISIS and HTS, and in other words, they were killing their comrades in Syria. And so now's the time for revenge, and that's why they're going for people who, at least since 2011, they're not concerned about the Syrian army in earlier decades, but certainly since 2011, those who were involved with helping the army, and that means a number of people, civilians, as well as the Syrian military. But also Hezbollah played a very important role in helping the Syrian Arab army in that long, dirty war, as did the Iranians, basically. They've come to some sort of accommodation with the Russians because the Russians are too big a player to be frivolous with, although the Russian base has been attacked once and they retaliated very quickly. So we talk about Russia, it's another game there, basically. But there is definitely a conspiracy going on within the Jolani regime to set up some of these foreign fighters to take part in the attacks on the Lebanese resistance, Hezbollah, who's defended Lebanon from Israeli invasion since the 80s, basically. And there's a coincidence of purpose with the Israelis, who are occupying much of South Syria now, to attack Hezbollah from the eastern flank, which hasn't been done before.
Give me your take on something else. What do you take the Russian role in the fall of the Assad government? And this wasn't a question I was going to ask prior, but I've had people on the show that believe that Russia was intimately involved in the fall or the collapse of the Syrian government.
Well, look, there is a lot of bad feeling in Syria about the Russians, because there are people who think that they could have saved the Syrian government, the Assad government, and also that they could have helped the Alawis on the coast, because the Russian base is very close to the site of those very big massacres back in March, which now there's been a UN report documenting that just recently too. But many thousands of Alawis, which is one of the largest minorities in Syria, were massacred after some brief resistance from former Syrian soldiers there back in March. And that all happened very close to the Russian base, and there was no real intervention by the Russians to defend them. I don't think there's any credible reports that the Russians were actually involved in the corruption and the downfall of the Syrian army, but certainly they had to respond very quickly. And respond they did. They got Assad out of the country. They got a lot of Syrian military out of the country, those that were still loyal and would have fought the invasion from the north and from the south. My view is that they made the best of a bad thing, basically. But then they wanted to hang on to their base after they saw that the Syrian army wasn't going to defend them. I think Russia took the same approach to Iran. Basically, they thought, we're there to help the Syrians, but if they're not going to help themselves, in other words, if the Syrian Arab Army, which was the main centerpiece of the Syrian state there, if that collapsed, we can't take their place. Remember, the Soviets got into a lot of trouble when they effectively took the place of the Afghan army back in the 70s, basically. And I think that's in the back of the Russian leaders' minds, basically. They went into Syria not as part of the axis of resistance, because they didn't have the same enemy in Israel. They have a much more ambiguous relationship with the Israelis. But they went in to help fight terrorism genuinely, and then they had to deal with a very difficult situation. Now, it's complicated by the fact that some members of the Russian base there did distribute some arms to Alawis to defend themselves, but then there was no follow-up to that. They said they were going to follow up. I think there were some contradictory messages going on from the Russian base at that time in coastal Syria. So there is some bad feeling that why didn't the Russians save us, and secondly, how come they didn't protect us? But I think to this day there are many thousands of Syrians still taking refuge in the Russian air base there, and what's going to happen to them, I'm not sure. But Russia has been providing some limited sort of help to people under threat there, but the ambiguity of the situation has led to a lot of conspiracy theories about the Russian role and presence.
Yes, I'm sorry. I'm still here. I've had difficulty with my camera and I'm trying to fix it. Thank you for that. Because I've had people who have come to the assessment that the Russians were involved, that they were making deals, that this stuff was about Ukraine, all of these points of view that I don't necessarily accept and agree with. So I'm glad that you kind of broke that down also. So going from Lebanon for a moment, do you believe that the political chaos that's taking place in Lebanon is directly related to this notion of creating divisions in Lebanon before any kind of attack on Lebanon, if that makes sense? And what I mean, just to be specific, this idea of we need to disarm Hezbollah. And then the president comes out saying, well, if we disarm Hezbollah, then if Israel attacks us, we can go to the UN Security Council, and the UN Security Council will do something about the fact that they attacked us. This is farce, like nonsense thinking. But it seems like this attempt at creating internal division is happening simultaneously with this idea of getting these Wahhabists from all across the world that are based in Syria to also attack Lebanon at the exact same time where this political chaos is taking place.
They would like to do to Lebanon what they've done to Syria, basically. And Lebanon has always been divided. Let's remember, it was set up to fail effectively as a state by the French back in the day. It was meant to be a Maronite Christian-dominated confessional state, where to this day there isn't really a strong state. That's why a non-state actor, Hezbollah, emerged. But not just Hezbollah, really. When you talk about the resistance in Lebanon, it also includes Amal, the other big Shia party, and all of the Palestinian factions. Let's remember, virtually all the factions, Hamas, Islamic Jihad, the Popular Front, even some Muslim Brotherhood groups. There are a lot of other groups that are helping defend Lebanon there. And so when you talk about the resistance, it's led by Hezbollah, but it has other elements. And also many sections of the Christian and Sunni Muslim community support the resistance, particularly when they saw what the resistance was doing to help Gaza. And of course, the most of the resistance in Palestine, particularly in Gaza, is Sunni Muslim. So the tragedy of Gaza, but the defense of Gaza was also something which dispensed with the sectarianism that was used to try and divide Syria and Iraq, basically, because many people saw that it was really the Shia Muslims that were playing the major, including Iran, of course, that were playing the major role in helping defend the Palestinians. So, of course, since the civil war in the 70s and 80s, which was basically a Muslim versus Christian civil war, things changed a lot. And you have this group called loyalty to the resistance, or a resistance coalition, if you like, led by Hezbollah. But that's been the subject of a lot of political attacks over the years. And traditionally, because Lebanon doesn't really have a normal state, and it has an army that has never defended Lebanon from the Israelis. That's why Hezbollah has been doing the work that the Lebanese army wouldn't. You see, the Lebanese army didn't do anything to the Israelis when they tried to invade the south late last year. It was all the resistance factions led by Hezbollah and the Palestinian factions that paid the price of defending the country down there. And it'll be something similar if the Israelis, with Syrian help, invade the Bekaa Valley from the east, basically. So I don't think that really even though it's a dangerous situation in Syria, but the greater threat is coming from the fact that there are tens of thousands of Israeli troops in South Syria able to take advantage of that accommodating situation and invade Lebanon there. Now, the role being played by Nawaf Salam that you mentioned, the Prime Minister, not elected, by the way. It's really there's a convention there reinforced at the end of the civil war that says the Prime Minister is always a Sunni Muslim, so from the Sunni Muslim parties. The President is always a Maronite Christian. So these things are just put into place by some sort of strange sort of consensus. There are elections for the parliament, but that doesn't change the complexion of the government, basically, because of these conventions. And even things like the health system and a lot of even garbage collection is sort of handled by these community leaders, right? Very wealthy leaders of the religious communities themselves. It's a highly privatized state. There's not very much in the way of public services, basically. Well, as a US citizen, you'll understand that. But that's the people say, there's not a state really in Lebanon. It's run by these different community leaders, many of whom are billionaires, basically. So what Nawaf Salam has done recently is to say we are now going to accede to the demands coming from the US and from the Israelis to disarm the resistance, and particularly Hezbollah is really seen as a great treachery by many in Lebanon now, and there were huge protests against it, and more recently some statements by all of the resistance-aligned groups, the Syrian Social National Party, the Palestinian factions, some other nationalist groups, and so on, to reject that. But of course, the problem is you do have these same groups have their own communities in the military. There is a very large number of, for example, Shia Muslims in the military. So there's been historically a very good relationship between Hezbollah and the Lebanese military. But if there's an order from the government to attack Hezbollah, for example, it's going to lead to a crisis in the army. People are saying it's going to lead to the disintegration of the army, really. If army commanders give those orders to go in and try and take weapons from it's already happened that some soldiers have died trying to seize weapons, possibly in caches that have been booby-trapped, basically. But that sort of conflict is going to lead to some sort of civil war and possible disintegration of the army. So really, it's seen as a huge act of treachery by this Prime Minister Nawaf Salam, and acceded to by President Joseph Aoun, who, in other circumstances, has been somewhat more of a centrist and somewhat more because let's remember, Hezbollah being armed is a reality which has been there for more than 4 decades in Lebanon. People have accepted it. It's been accepted by successive governments. Hezbollah has been part of those governments. The Shia parties withdrew from the deliberations of ministers when Nawaf Salam took this decision to agree to the US demands. I mean, it's very clever, isn't it? The US and the Israelis are getting through the Lebanese government what they couldn't do themselves by force of arms, by invasion and so on, even though Lebanon unfortunately has no air defense. And so the Israelis have been able to bomb the south and bomb Beirut, the capital city, again and again, because there's been no significant air defense there. That shows you another way to show you how hopeless the Lebanese military is. Nevertheless, part of the so-called ceasefire with the Israelis, which the Israelis have never respected all this year, was a demand that they disarm the resistance and that only the Lebanese army be an armed presence in the south of Lebanon, basically. But the Lebanese army, as I said, traditionally they've never lifted a finger against the Israelis there. It's only been the resistance that has defended the country at great cost, at the cost of many, many lives. And unfortunately, we may be going to see the same thing again there with a treacherous prime minister in place trying to disarm the resistance as the Israelis and the Al-Qaeda groups in Syria attempt another invasion of Lebanon, this time from the eastern flank. So it's really a terrible, the prospects for Lebanon are terrible because this attempt to try and disarm the resistance is happening at the very time when a very great threat appears to Lebanon from its eastern flank.
Yeah, that's what I mean. It's so sinister. Like the way this is being organized and arranged, it's almost like chess on some level. It's like the pieces are arranged and you create internal division at the exact same time that you're effectively trying to attack. I want to hit another story with you. There are people who I actually agree with, by the way. And I'm assuming that Iran also agrees, considering the speeches that are being made and some of the, let's say, language coming out of Iran in response. There's a belief that part of the reason that Donald Trump wants to settle the issue with Ukraine is because he wants to set up an attack on Iran. Spring Leader comes out, gives a speech, and it's only 59 seconds, so I'm going to let this play out. And I want to get your take on what he's saying and whether or not you believe that an attack on Iran is imminent.
میگن آقا شعار ندید علیه آمریکا عصبانی میشن با شما دشمنی میکنن اینا ظاهر بینن این کسانی که تحلیل میکنن که چرا با آمریکا مذاکره مستقیم نمی کنید مسائلتون حل نمی کنید به نظر من ظاهر بینن باطن قضیه این نیست این مسئله حل نشده نیست او میخواد که ایران گوش به فرمان آمریکا باشه ملت ایران از چنین اهانت بزرگی به شدت رنجیده میشه و در مقابل اون کسانی و اون کسی که چنین توقع غلطی از ملت ایران داره با همه قدرت میسته این کسانی
He seems to have come to this kind of assessment of like, look, all of those people internally that have said, well, we should negotiate with the Americans. We should talk to the Americans. You guys are getting it wrong. Now, I've spoken to Iranians who have made a similar point, saying that part of the reason that they were willing to negotiate the first time around was because of political divisions in Iran, that you had many liberals in Iran that thought that all of the issues that were affecting Iran were specific and pertaining to this, let's say, division between the United States and Iran, that if Iran only negotiated, if they only, welcomed the Americans, that things would change. And the war made it clear that that wasn't the case, that this was actually a band of monsters, that their issue with Iran was that Iran existed as a state. It seems that he's trying to point out and hammer that point. Like, look, this is not about us making friends with the US. We have irreconcilable differences. Those differences being we breathe air and we exist. Give me your take on that. I mean, and I guess the question boils down to, do you think that the US is making moves to go after Iran? There was reports the US was emptying out some of their bases that were in the area. And you would think that the only reason you would do that is because you're trying to limit the amount of casualties that would take place when Iran responds to whatever attack the US goes along with. Otherwise, why would they be doing it? Give me your take on this.
Well, look, we've spoken about this before, that the fact that Iran is very polite the way that it carries out war. It gives people's warnings. I remember when I was flying through the Persian Gulf when the Iranians were going to retaliate against the US base in Qatar. And all the flights were stopped several hours before because the Iranians told them we're going to be firing missiles. And so they give them notice of these sorts of things. There was no surprise attack like the Israelis did on Iran, basically. But look, as far as the US is concerned, let's remember when the Iranian Revolution happened in 1979, and the students took over the US embassy. They turned it into a museum with all the paper shredders and everything like that, and they call it the Den of Spies. And you can go and visit there if you go to Iran. It's a very interesting museum. And but they never reopened relations. They cut relations with the US, and they never reopened them. So there is no direct diplomatic relations. Iran is one of the very few countries. Cuba never did this. Cuba never cut relations. The US cut relations with Cuba, and then Obama reopened it. But Iran never reopened relations with the US because they'd imposed that Shah, that monarchy on Iran after overthrowing a democratic government back in the 50s, and they didn't forgive them for that, basically. So when they've been talking to them, they've been talking indirectly, through a third party. Nevertheless, there have been talks, and as you point out, there's a big liberal constituency in Iran. There's quite a big middle class that is influenced by this idea. I would say has some illusions with the idea that there's going to be some sort of normalization possibilities with the US and with the Europeans, basically. But we saw from after the agreement that Obama made with Iran in 2015, and that was a president who was Rouhani, who was quite in the camp of the liberals, basically, that it was really seen that the liberals in Iran put it up as a great achievement, that this new ethos of cooperating and negotiating, getting along with the Western regimes was some sort of new virtue that would lead to a brighter future and so on. Economic possibilities, of course. We saw how what a short time that lasted for. Obama didn't respect the agreement, and then Trump tore it up, basically. So in a sense, the credibility of the liberals went downhill. But it's true that you've got a constituency, a genuine political constituency. I mean, between the elections, when there's a change of government, there's probably greater change in policies in Iran than there are in most Western governments, basically, because of this difference in approaches, basically. But nevertheless, what happened when the Israelis attacked Iran in June, just a couple of months ago, was that it united the country. All of the liberals that would have been reluctant, let's say, to get engaged in a direct confrontation with the Israelis, came together and supported the leader, and the leaders really got a role in strategic and foreign affairs issues. Constitutionally, he's very important. Khamenei is very important in terms of strategic issues. But nevertheless, the country was unified to defend itself against this Israeli attack. So they were using, the Article 51 of the UN Charter of Self-Defense to justify retaliating against the Israelis. Many people were saying, how come you didn't retaliate earlier when they killed 19 Iranians in Syria, and then they assassinated one of your guests at the inauguration, Palestinians and so on. Nevertheless, when the Israelis, and they've been pushing for this for decades, they were pushing for an attack on Iran before they pushed for the invasion of Iraq, before they did lots of other things. It was back in, I think, 1996 that Benjamin Netanyahu was pushing for an attack on Iran. And so even though the Israelis got hit very hard in that 12-day war, they are saying to themselves, if you read their media, that they're jubilant. They think that they won, even though they were hit very badly, because one, it was the first time they hit Iran directly, and two, they managed to incite Trump to come along and back them up. Although another view of that is that Trump came in to save them, because really they were getting hit very hard and they're running out of munitions, and they've been trying to stock up ever since. But actually it's difficult because the sort of technology that the US was providing them with is very expensive, and the US doesn't produce it very quickly. I saw that those THAAD missile systems, they only make about 12 a year, and the Israelis used about 100 of them. Well, the Israelis and their NATO friends used about 100 of them trying to stop the Iranian missiles, with limited success. Apparently there's different figures on the interception rate there, but basically it got worse as time went on, and we all saw very clearly that many of them were getting through, basically. So the Israelis have been trying to stock up. They've been talking openly about another attack on Iran. I don't know that it's actually a Trump-led calculation to attack Iran or create a major war with Iran. Certainly the Iranians have been preparing for that for a long time, because it's been talked about for a long time. I can recall at least 20 years ago, the US, George W. Bush, talking about this, and I remember Fidel Castro getting very alarmed at the prospect that this was going to lead to the nuclear war back in 2008 or something like that. So this has been talked about a lot, but really the main cheerleader has been the incumbent in the Israeli colony in Palestine, Netanyahu. He's pushing for it. He's the main enthusiast for it. But Trump has been going along with what he wants for the most part so far. And of course, Trump has got these Zionist sponsors at home too, So I don't know really that Trump is wanting a war with Iran, because by any account, it's going to be extremely difficult. And there's not going to be any easy way to do it. The US can bomb countries, but look what happened with Yemen. They were driven away from the Red Sea, basically, because they were being exhausted. Not that the Yemenis were sinking ships, not that the Yemenis were able to defeat the US military, but they were exhausted because they were they were being chased all around the Red Sea, these aircraft carriers, and according to them, their warplanes were falling off the edge as they were doing sharp turns, in the Red Sea. One way or the other, they were losing drones. They were losing Predator drones, I think 20 of them in the end, and a couple of F-35s or warplanes. So expensive stuff. The sailors themselves were getting exhausted, so they were wanting to give them a break, basically. So effectively, Trump withdrew them from the Red Sea and sort of effectively allowed the Yemeni revolutionary government, which they stupidly call Houthi rebels. What sort of rebels have hypersonic missiles and this type of they've been running most of the country for more than 10 years. But because of the immense capacity the US has to control media and communications and ideological development, there's still, everyone's calling them Houthi rebels, but no, they're a revolutionary government in Sana'a. I visited them there. They're very impressive. They're still shooting those missiles at the Israeli regime, and the Israelis are retaliating there. Of course, Yemen is one other state in the region that's coordinating with Iran now in this so-called axis of resistance. And they're playing an important role, really, because they're harassing the Israelis in the same way that they were harassing the US Navy. Basically, they're forcing the colonists into the bomb shelters with the missiles that they're sending into infrastructure and the airport there. So they're an important part of this regional war that's going on there. It's really, I've been saying this for probably 10 years. There's a single war going on that region. It's one war. The US is the chief architect of it. The important players are the Saudis, Israelis, the ISIS, various Al-Qaeda groups and so on. But this is a single US war against the region to try and control or recolonize the entire region. And they're having a little bit of success, but they're also having some failures. And of course, one of their failures was with Yemen. Another one was with Iran. Basically, I think they will attack. I think the Israelis will try and build up their weapon supply so they can attack Iran again. They're going to get hit even harder this time. We know that the Iranians are leading the game in missile technology in the region, basically. And so it's going to be, I'm not sure, that they're fooling themselves really about what they're going to gain from this. They can kill people, just like the US can kill people with air power, but they're going to get hit very, very hard when they attack. I say when because it's almost a certainty. They're talking about it. Iran really has a great justification for a preemptive strike on the Israelis, but it doesn't seem to be their style. It didn't stop the Israelis talking about preemption. It didn't stop the US and Britain talking about preemption with Iraq and so on. The Iranians have a much better pretext for that because the Israelis are openly talking about hitting them again. Anyway, it may be that the Iranians wait, but they'll come back with more this time, and they've got friends who are helping them with resources. The Russians and the Iranians are not, and the Chinese, are not going to get directly involved, but they are supplying them with resources by which the Iranians can defend themselves, and they're a formidable force, Iran. But unfortunately, I think we're going to see another war like the 12-day war. I don't know how long it will last, but I think it's a fairly good chance that there won't be much left of the Israeli military at the end of it, which is the good news.
Yeah, but that's the part that confuses me. So is the thinking, because when I think this out, when I think through this, I have to come away with an assessment that the side that's attacking wants to win, whatever win means, meaning you have a military objective, you want to accomplish your military objective, and your actions are to further whatever that objective is. Okay. Israel can't beat Iran. It just can't. I mean, you can nuke it. Fair enough. But that's all you can do. A country of 8 million people is not going to beat a country of 90 million people. They just aren't. So is the belief that ultimately the United States will get involved? Is the belief that ultimately we can create a context by which we use nuclear weapons? Understanding, though, that Israel is fundamentally destroyed in that particular context. It's not like Iran. Iran may be limiting itself for reasons that it don't necessarily want to go far enough where Israel uses nukes. But in an existential crisis, they, like any other country, will cut loose with anything they have at their disposal to destroy the other person. So what is the thinking pattern in regards to Israel? Just the U.S. got involved once. The U.S. will get involved again if we need them to. And if we look like we're taking a hit that's sufficient enough for the United States to get involved. Meaning they don't believe Trump. They believe that all things being equal, Trump will bring the U.S. into a larger war with Iran if necessary. Is that what it is?
Well, look, the Israelis are very arrogant. And so arrogant people see things in a different sort of way. They have been privately boasting that they control the US. I don't think they do. They have a lot of influence in the US. There's a lot of many people in the US deep state see Israel as their forward base to control the region. So there's the problem there. From the Iranian point of view, I think it's important to remember the Iranians have been cautious in many respects because they see that if they respond to the Israelis in such a way that poses an existential threat to the Israeli colony, that the US may intervene there. So Iran has been preparing for a war with the US for a very long time. That's why its capacity is enormous at the moment, basically. But they don't want to get involved in one because, of course, it's unpredictable and no one knows what extent of damage is going to be there. But they've been stocking up for and developing their domestic technology for that reason, but they would do all things to try and avoid it. So there's the problem too with the retaliation against the Israelis. In many respects, the Iranian retaliation has been measured because they're trying to establish a type of deterrence equation, which doesn't seem to work because the Israelis are too arrogant and they have the idea that, well, if we get in too deep, we're in trouble, the US is going to come and save us again, whatever that means, basically. So you're talking about, with the Israelis, they're not really rational people. They're very arrogant. They think that they can drag the US into a war. They've done it once, but they don't quite see it the same way that others see it. I think in many respects, it's correct to say that Trump was saving them at that time by imposing a ceasefire on both sides, and with this ridiculous idea that he'd somehow destroyed the whole nuclear industry. That was always a pretext anyway. The whole question of talks over Iran's nuclear industry was really just an attempt to try and limit its role in the region, to try and some sort of unilateral disarmament, which was unjustified really because Iran has more reason to have a strong military than almost any other state in the region, basically. But it was an attempt to disarm and to disarm the influence that the Iranians have in the region. Of course, they've always resented the US and its NATO, partners, always resented the fact that Iran has been very strong to support the Palestinian resistance all this time. It hasn't been a sectarian thing. It's not about Shia power because there's hardly any Shia Muslims in Palestine. But Iran has been the major supporter of the Palestinian resistance. And of course, the independent resistance in Iraq and the independent state that used to exist in Syria, and to some extent some other elements in the region, including now the revolutionary government in Yemen, which has not necessarily very strong material support because actually the Yemenis have been buying their fuel from the enemy, from the Emiratis, for example. That's been coming to Yemen until the Israelis bombed Ras Isa and Hodeidah port and so on. To diffuse the sort of the accusations of Iranian involvement, the Yemenis decided to buy fuel from the enemy, basically and that was going through private companies too. There's actually been also quite a bit of business across the front lines in the areas that are still occupied in Yemen, and most of it's under the control of the revolutionary government, but there is quite a deal of commerce going on between private companies. And the recent bombing, if you saw it by the Israelis, was of a big petrol station in Sana'a and some other installations. Well, because really it's been private companies that have been running the energy sector and the petroleum sector in Yemen, basically. And also the Israelis and the US don't have very good intelligence on Yemen. They had much better intelligence on Lebanon, but they haven't been able to infiltrate Yemen to the same degree to know where their stockpiles are. I believe the Iranians did help them with developing underground capacity to store their new generation weapons that they've developed there, which aren't in the scale of the Iranian arsenal, but nevertheless some very important weapons like the Palestine 2 missile, which they keep using against the Israelis, basically. But the Israelis haven't been able to locate or do much damage to that, and so therefore the capacity of the Yemenis to respond to the Israelis is really undiminished. But they're able to kill people. They're able to hit civilian infrastructure and a petrol station, which is the big fireworks one you just showed, basically.
Yeah.
But Yemen has this tremendous determination, tremendous identification with the Palestinian people. They really see them as their own people, basically, and they don't hesitate. They just take it as a moral imperative that they have to respond immediately. That they're looking to see, for example, at the moment, whether there was any US involvement in the recent attacks on Yemen, and they say they will retaliate immediately against any US assets if the US was involved in that, and not just the Israelis.
Right. And I think Ansar Allah is getting this right. I think Iran is getting this wrong. We can move to Yemen, but I do want to hit the Iran thing one more time. Do they understand? I don't mean this poorly. Do they understand this strategy at work, this pecking away? Like, if you remember, immediately as the war was going on, as it was coming to its conclusion, Israel said, we want to use the Lebanese model on Iran. Effectively, we want to peck them to death. We want to stop, refill, reload, do it again. Stop, reload, do it again. And if Iran is taking this point of view of, okay, we'll stop because the Israelis stopped, that's a failed point of view. None of that is going to prevent the Israelis from continuously hitting them. And even in the context of a ceasefire, it didn't stop the United States from getting involved. I understand what you're saying, and I understand the threat. But in every situation, everything that they've done in order to avoid a threat has only made it worse. I don't, like, surely the government is aware of this, so I'm not trying to say the government is oblivious to it. Ayatollah seems to be perfectly aware of it, and his speeches tend to make that point very clear. Pezeshkian and the reformist government, less so. What I'm trying to get at is, I understand this want for peace. I get it. But that want for peace is being used and weaponized by their opposition in order to chip away at Iran. Iran can only make missiles so fast. If the US continuously supplies Israel with missiles every time there's a pause, what does it mean for Iran's missile supply? If you're given them multiple opportunities to go after your decision-making centers, what does it mean in regards to the casualties that they're going to take on this? And then they would say, we don't even want a nuclear missile. Like, some of this confuses me, if I'm being bluntly honest, because in every other strategy that has taken place where pacifism or reticence has been looked at as weakness, Iran has done this multiple times. If you remember when they had that first attack, Iran let it go. They did a theatrical thing. Then they attacked Israel after Israel attacked them with a little bit more oomph, but it was still kind of like, hey, we don't want a war. We don't want to get involved. And Israel looked at this as, okay, they're weak, so we need to hit them again. And then they did hit them again. Iran responded, but Iran did lose like 900 people in that exchange. Whereas for them, they wanted to have a sanctified war. Israel is going to hit them again. And if there's a pause, we'll hit them again after that. I guess I'm saying, at what point does Iran get this? That this is not about nukes. It's not about anything else. It's about their existence. Give me your thoughts, and we can move on to Yemen after this.
Yeah, you have a good point there. But let's remember that when people go to war, it's easy for outsiders who are not responsible for the consequences to say you should have done this, because the people who are responsible are going to have to wear the cost of their actions, basically.
Agreed.
You have a lot of people in Iran who don't want to be engaged in a war unnecessarily. You notice that the pretext that Iran and Yemen use is rather different at the moment. That Iran, up until now, because the military leaders have been saying recently some things that are pushing the envelope a little bit. Up until now, they've been relying on this self-defense right under Article 51 of the UN Charter, right? They haven't gone much beyond that. The Yemenis, on the other hand, have been citing to back up their moral convictions and why they respond to the Israelis and why they imposed a naval blockade on the Israelis, to say that there is an obligation in international law under the 1948 Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of Genocide to intervene directly. You don't ask for anyone's permission. You intervene directly to prevent and punish that crime, including the accomplices. So even their attacks on U.S. warships, which were protecting the trade to the Israelis, they weren't attacking other commerce. Right. Was in other words, they went beyond a self-defense pretext to say that we are acting against. We are citing international law that requires everyone to do something to stop the genocide. Who else is doing that? No one else is doing that. You can criticize Iran, but who else is doing things to stop the genocide apart from Yemen there? Now, I would say there's a third element of international law that's relevant here, and that is that apartheid.
Yes.
Apartheid is a crime against humanity, according to UN resolutions since the 1970s. There are now 6 independent reports branding the Israeli regime as an apartheid state. And one of the most important reports, by Richard Falk and Virginia Tilley from 2017, prepared for the UN, but it was depublished after some political lobbying, says that the same thing, that there is an obligation on the international community to dismantle an apartheid regime because it is a crime against humanity. In other words, Israel does not have a right to exist. The international community has an obligation to dismantle an apartheid regime as a crime against humanity. Now, that's a rationale that the Iranians or anyone else could pick up. I mean, the US could pick it up, but of course they're not doing it. Anyone else could pick that up and say there is an obligation on everyone, including, I think, Francesca Albanese, the UN rapporteur, makes this point, on civil society, on all of us, to do something to stop a genocide and to dismantle apartheid there. Now, who has the means to do it? People are talking about different projects at the moment. But, of course, the front line of this is really the Axis of Resistance states in the region. It's really, in my view, and this is just my opinion, but, I'm not responsible for the Iranian lives that are going to be lost with what the Iranians do. But in my view, the regional resistance led by Iran is going to be the one that is able to destroy the apartheid regime in Israel. And then there'll be a step towards creating some sort of new governance in historic Palestine, including presumably the anti-Zionist or the anti-apartheid Jewish population that's still in minority, that's still in the Israeli colony there. So there is a rationale for it. No one is really citing it yet as a reason to go to war, but these things change during a war, and it may be. You see some of the Iranian military now saying more or less what you're saying. They're saying that, if they try it again, we're going to do much more damage to them. We have another generation of weapons to do this with, and they will regret it, and so on. So there are strong messages coming out, and you would regard this in the past as attempt to use diplomatic leverage, backed by their demonstrative attacks in the past and the actual damage that they did in June there, to try and create some sort of deterrent effect. So at the moment, there's some consistency between those forces in Iran who might want to create some sort of deterrent relationship to prevent the Israelis from trying to attack again, and others who would like to go in and finish the job, basically. But that's a very political decision that's going to have to be taken by people who are responsible for the consequences of their actions at that time. That's why I always pour a little bit of cold water on us armchair generals who say this is what someone else should do when we're not going to wear the cost of it, basically. I've heard people say the same thing about Lebanon and Palestine too, that why don't we just keep going? But really, we're not responsible for saying these sorts of things. We can say all sorts of opinions there, but pay attention to some of the Iranian military people. They are saying, look at the Tehran Times and Tasnim and Mer and so on. You will see reports in the Iranian media, and the Iranian media, by the way, in English, is the biggest independent media in the region. It's worth flicking through the pages there. They have a lot of reports going on about what they would like to do if the Israelis attack again, on the basis that they're trying to deter the Israelis, but they're also prepared for another attack. But let's see. The Yemenis do see things in a rather different way. They're not mimicking things. There is some coordination going on there. At the moment, the next target seems to be Lebanon. It seems that the Israelis, with their Al-Qaeda allies, they bomb them from time to time because they're trying to set up a pretext to be the protectors of the Druze in South Syria, and the Druze the Druze are more or less in a difficult position because they don't want to create a separate state like the Kurds or even the Alawis on the coast. But anyway, they're armed. They managed to defend themselves to a certain degree before the Israelis started bombing there. But the Israelis have a very strong toehold all through South Syria now, and that's the big danger for Lebanon at the moment. I think that the Yemenis will also intervene to defend Lebanon, I believe. They've said this in the past too, in some ways, and Iran may do that too. But this has become a political hot potato in Lebanon now because the US is getting its way with the so-called Lebanese government. I say so-called because no one in Lebanon really believes that there's a state in Lebanon.
You brought up a fantastic point. So the foreign minister of Syria, I believe it was foreign minister of Syria, visited Iran. And there was this kind of conversation. Am I saying that right? No, I said that wrong. Foreign minister of Lebanon visited Iran. This was, I believe, last week. And apparently there was a conversation on this idea of...
I know the senior security advisor from Iran visited Lebanon.
Okay, I got it backwards. Thank you for that.
Yep.
And in that conversation, it took place last week, and so it's kind of on the outskirts of my memory.
Yep.
In that conversation, apparently, Iran made their point of view very clear about what they were trying to do with regards to Hezbollah. My question is, would Iran back that up with force, if necessary?
They won't use force.
I'm super curious about that, by the way.
They won't use force against the Lebanese government, but they are still assisting the resistance in Lebanon, as they always have done. A friend said to me when I was in Lebanon 2 months ago that there are many Iranian advisors in Lebanon helping Hezbollah rebuild its capacity there, its military capacity. So it's never been any secret that the Iranians have been funding and training and helping the Lebanese with their technology. Previously, they were helping the Syrians build the weapons, and then the Syrians would ship them to Lebanon. That route has been cut off, but there are new mechanisms being created to help fund Hezbollah and to rebuild Hezbollah in Lebanon. So they are aware of this threat from the Israelis coming from the Syrian side. They obviously be preparing a response to that because, and it may be that they have an agreement with the Lebanese army because they are deeply inside the Lebanese army too. Although the army is now in this very difficult situation because they have a virtually an almost impotent prime minister trying to tell them to do something that's contrary to their interests, basically. But historically, there's been a lot of cooperation. In fact, the Lebanese army has acted against some infiltration from the Syrian side by these Al-Qaeda groups, basically, because they've even arrested some of them because they carried out some murders. There were some small-scale skirmishes on the border, around the border, the Syrian-Lebanese border in the Kalamun Mountains there. So I believe there'll be some coordination going on within the Lebanese army and Hezbollah in face of this threat coming from the Syrian side. Mm-hmm. So just because...
Oh, I'm sorry. Please.
Just because Nawaf Salam says something doesn't mean to say that... there's a nickname they have for Nawaf Salam in Lebanon. It's based on a Syrian soapy, a popular Syrian soapy from about a decade or so back. And there's a man called Mamoun Bek. Mamoun Bek is like a dirty little treacherous creature who, for his own self-interest, betrays his country, basically. So the image of image of Nawaf Salam is not very high in Lebanon.
Yeah, I can tell. Yeah, I mean, he's working so closely with the U.S. I can imagine. And by the way, just to be clear, I am at great pains to say stuff on military matters in that way because I agree with you. It's like, dude, you're in a room somewhere. These guys have to bear the consequences of it.
Mhm.
But there are certain things that seem clear that seems to happen over and over and over again. And it's like, okay, this looks bad. And if the response didn't work, what is a better response to try to deal with it? That's what I'm coming in from it. But I agree with you.
But from the Iranian point of view, they were united to retaliate strongly against the Israelis back in June. If they had initiated that war, if they had preempted it, in other words, there may have been a lot of people in Iran who said, "Why are we doing this?" And now we're getting hit. And if we hadn't done this, we wouldn't be suffering. 1,000 people were killed. I think you said 900. I think it's over 1,000 now were killed in June in Iran. The Israelis did kill a lot of people in Iran, and they damaged their air defense too. So you've got to remember that people are going to have to answer for their actions. We've talked about preemption, and preemption has a logic to it, but it's also there are going to be people internally who will say, "How come all my relatives were killed because you started this war?" In June, the Iranians could say, "No, the Israelis started." Everyone knows the Israelis started. Everyone knows. I mean, in the US, they're saying some rubbish about whatever, but basically everyone in the region, every independent observer knows that the Israelis started the 12-day war in June, and that Iran was entitled to defend itself, including by smashing many of the strategic installations and oil refineries and so on in Israel. So there's no question of blame back there. Also, the question of escalation is diminished somewhat because escalation is always a big unpredictable thing. No one knows where escalation is going to go. So that's always been an Iranian worry. So who gets blamed for it at home? If there's a split in the domestic support for the defense and for the retaliation against Israel, that's an important thing. And the risk of escalation also depending on where the blame lies. I mean, that's why there's a point, I suppose. There is a good point to the Iranian government keeping the high moral ground in these things. There are considerations that they have to take.
I agree. You have my full agreement.
I would make the same decision, but I'm not Iranian and I'm not sitting in Tehran, not at the moment. Anyway.
No, you have my full agreement. Preemptive war is kind of politically treacherous. The way Iran played it made it very clear. They're the aggressors. They were able to consolidate political support.
Look, Russia was under great threat. And the Russian people were being killed. And then they launched this special military operation, and most of the world is saying, "Oh, this was entirely unprovoked." Even the Pope says it was provoked, but the rest of the world has been repeating like a mantra, "This is unprovoked."
The rest of the West, only the West.
But because the Russians preempted the build-up on their border, basically. So there are risks to be managed, that requires responsible people to make the decisions.
Agreed. And agreed. You have my full agreement on that. I don't think Iran should have preempted an attack. Agreed. I do agree with the Russians for going in, but it's only Europe. I mean, it's like 14% of the globe is like, oh, Russia shouldn't have done this, but this is like a girls' club,
Well, most of the world was very reluctant to openly support Russia, but you see with the rush of countries going to join BRICS since then, that secretly they like what Russia did. They like the fact that Russia stood up to the big bully, basically. They respect Russia for that, but they're afraid to say it. I have to say this is a very common phenomenon around the world. I've seen it in the past. If you ever saw Fidel Castro or Hugo Chavez talking at the United Nations, the African countries, the Asian countries, the Latin American countries, they loved it. They loved that someone was saying something they didn't have the courage to say themselves. They didn't want to say it themselves, but when Chavez said it, when Fidel said it, they loved it. So there is this phenomenon, that people are many, many countries, and particularly countries' leaders who are more cautious than the average people, want someone else to do something, but they love it when someone else does it sometimes.
Well, they're not in the crosshairs in the way that these other countries are. And
they're worried about being in the crosshairs.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. No, I totally.
They know
I
the
agree.
bullying that's going on, the bullying that's been going on for ages. That's why they love it when Ibrahim Traore, in Burkina Faso does something, that they love it intuitively. They think, of course, this is the right thing to do. But why haven't other people done it before? They didn't have the courage to do that. But they love to see Traore doing what he's doing, basically, but risking what he's risking, as with, others in the past that have, the Gaddafi and Lumumba, the people have done those sorts of things. They know there's a risk in this.
Yeah. Their lives, their countries, all of it is up for grabs on some level. Tim, you are a fantastic guest. Your breakdowns are
Very
great.
kind.
I appreciated this. Thank you for this. Tim
Thank you.
Anderson. He is a writer, international academic, and director of Center for Counter Hegemonic Studies. In fact, the site is counter-hegemonic-studies.site. Is that correct?
SITE, that's right, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Tim, thank you for this, man. I always appreciate it. You have a fantastic night. Okay.
You too.
Have a good one. Be safe. All right, Tim is awesome. I apologize for my camera. I had to replace it in the middle of the interview. Hashtag problems. I tried for a new mic. I tried for a new camera. Both of those things failed miserably. I will try that camera again, and I will try the settings to see if I can get something to actually work on that. Tim is fantastic. Tim is fantastic. And look, he's right about the Iran thing. Like, I've had guests from Iran who were, let's say, more aggressive in their takes. And I agree with those takes. But I agree with those takes because I was born and raised in the States. And being born and raised in the States give you a certain point of view on the issue of, let's say, military matters in general. We have a warped point of view in the way that other countries respond because we're looking at it from the person point of view of primacy. The U.S. gets the right to attack other countries. Other countries apparently don't get the right to attack the U.S. So Iran has to wait for Israel to attack. It would never outright attack Israel. Is that fair? Doesn't matter if it's fair. Fairness has nothing to do with it. It's the way it breaks down. Looking at it as an American, you say, well, wait a minute, they're pecking you to death. You have to respond. Now, responding doesn't necessarily mean a preemptive attack, but stopping the other attack. But again, if you are in leadership, you're stuck with the consequences of doing that. No, I get it. It just sucks that we are putting these countries in these positions, whether it's Iran or for that matter, whether it's Venezuela. We are literally on the coast of Venezuela with the US coming up with this nonsense point of view that they're drugs. And so we need to potentially invade Venezuela in order to deal with the drugs that Maduro is apparently pushing out to the US. This is nonsense. There is oil, a huge amount of it, under Venezuela. Venezuela has increased their partnership with Iran and China. Iran, China, and Russia. And the US has taken issue with them doing so. In fact, Marco Rubio, at one point, so when they asked where I was raised, I didn't. No, I'm an American. I love my country. I just don't like the lunatics that have taken charge of it. People get me wrong. And I know touching my ear is a signal for dishonesty in regards to body language reading. But I'm telling the truth on this. When people say you hate your country, why don't you like your country, etc., it's not the country. The country is a landmass. It is the lunatics, the sociopaths or psychopaths that effectively taken over that country and has caused havoc around the globe. I make a distinction between a country and the individuals that are associated to make up that country. Even if people aren't tranced to a certain point of view, that point of view is beaten into them over the course of time that they've effectively lived under that society of sociopaths. I find there to be a difference. I have no issue saying I was from America, born in America, love my country in general. I don't like the sociopaths that run it. Those are very different things. Speaking of sociopaths, here's one in particular that is trying to come up with some kind of justification to invade peace president, by the way, Venezuela. Sociopath Marco Rubio.
Agreed to have elections. The elections were completely fake.
What does that have to do with you? What does that have to do with you? Let's say you're right. Let's say that the elections were completely and entirely fake. What does that have to do with Marco Rubio? Romania had fake elections. If we're going to bring up places that had fake elections, what does it have to do with you? It's none of your business. The country deals with itself. Not to mention, you have a genocide taking place that you're perfectly okay with. None of this stuff has anything to do with you. Let's keep going. Sociopath Marco Rubio.
Leverage migration against us to get those concessions. And now they have these general licenses where companies like Chevron are actually providing billions of dollars of money into the regime's coffers. And the regime kept none of the promises that they made. So all that needs to be re-explored. Because in Venezuela, you have the Russian presence, you have a very strong Iranian presence. The Iranians, in fact, are beginning to build drone factories for the manufacture of Iranian drones in our own hemisphere. Not to mention the long practice.
Oh, isn't that ironic? Oh, I love the irony. I love the irony. I love the irony. They're building drone factories. So the huge presence in Ukraine. I've made this point before. Let me bring on Mark. I'm not going to get fully into this. I'm just saying it's very ironic, Mark, that when Ukraine built up this massive army supported by the West, that they said, well, Russia's supposed to just look at that and be okay with that. Russia shouldn't take issue with Ukraine joining NATO and having the largest military in Europe on their border and killing ethnic Russian Ukrainians. They should be okay with that. Apparently, when something similar has happened on the U.S. coast, the U.S. feels some kind of way about it. Mark Sleboda, International Relations Security Analyst. How you doing, Mark? You doing okay today?
Jamaro, thanks for having me. It's always an honor and a pleasure to be on the show. I'm alive. How are you? And I am shocked, Jamaro. I am shocked about U.S. hypocrisy.
Yeah, that is pretty amazing. They're building up on the coast of Venezuela. But I want you on to have a conversation about what's taking place in two realms. One has to do with negotiations, if there are any. And the other has to do with what's taking place on the ground in regards to, let's say, the military aspect of this war. Because, again, it seems like, I'll use your term, flanking Slaviansk Kramatorsk. And it seems like these are the final lines of defense, after which there are no lines of defense. And if these fall, oh my God, for Ukraine, right? Give me your take on
Well,
this.
actually, they are constructing more lines of defense west of Slaviansk Kramatorsk right now. They're attempting to build a Ukrainian equivalent of the Syrovikin line, right? Like literally on the Donbass, Dnipropetrovsk, border. They began construction several months ago. Now, here's an open question. I mean, okay, so it's not an open question. They will obviously not be the equivalent of the Syrovikin line. They don't have the engineering or manpower capacity or the money to replicate what Russia did. They don't have the manpower either. And it appears that at least one place in the Russian deep penetration to the north, on the north flank of Pokrovsk, that they've already breached that line in one place. That's how deep that penetration was. But to say that there's no more defensive lines is technically inaccurate. How well defended those defensive lines will be outside. Again, a lot of people don't understand this. And certainly it's not explained in the Western media. But one of the reasons why it was chosen to make this all or nothing stand in the Donbass is because of the unique geography, the unique topography of the Donbass, right? It is a hilly and forested region, which is for Ukraine not altogether common, right? Because the majority of the rest of the Ukrainian country is steppe, right? This is Donbass is a unique hilly and forested area, and it is packed full of you can call it urban agglomeration, right? Small towns, small cities rolling into each other, and a very high number of Soviet-built facilities, mines, factories that were frankly built to withstand the Cold War, right? They're all built with bunkers and deep layers underneath them, for bunkers and for storage and preparation. So all of that, makes excellent defensive fortifications, right? It was not hard to turn them into defensive fortifications, but that will not be the case west of Slavyansk, Kramatorsk, and Konstantinovka. This new defensive line that they're erecting is already not in that urban agglomeration by necessity. So whatever defenses they are able to erect by then, it will not be the equivalent, which means that the nature of the conflict in geographical terms will undergo a marked change once the Donbass is fully liberated. And there is also, I think, of course, going to be a political question, right? Because once again, when that happens, right, sometime probably early next year, right, Putin will once again turn to the West and say, have you had enough? Are we done? And he will give them a chance to agree to Russia's terms, right? And when they don't take it, then they'll be all right, and they will keep going.
So you don't think, under no circumstances, will they? Because I have this perhaps fantasy, you could disabuse me of it, that Donald Trump, on some level, needs Ukraine to lose more people, more land, more territory at the Donbass for him to ever come to any kind of conclusion on the deal. That he doesn't want to use and say, I'm out, I'm done, I'm not getting intelligence, I'm pulling out the CIA, I'm pulling out all this stuff, I'm walking, for political reasons. But when he's given a press conference and he says, I need them to fight, I need them to fight, and you just pointed out that one side is getting eaten alive, then it sounds like to me it's, I need the side to get eaten alive more in order for me, Trump, to walk out of this thing with a deal, believing that they may come to some agreement. But you don't think it's no situation where they're going to come to agreement.
Sure. Jamal, can you do something for me?
Please.
Because I can't do this because of the constraints of the medium. Slap yourself across the face. do that for me, right? I'm serious. Slap yourself across the face.
So you're making the point of saying that's nonsense. Under no circumstances.
How many cruise missiles did Donald Trump just sell, quote unquote, to the regime in Kiev?
Agreed.
3,500 cruise missiles
that we may not even have.
We almost certainly don't have right now.
Yeah.
But it's not his war, right?
No, I do believe it's his war. And I do believe he's a U.S. president that is still trying to push for primacy in a losing situation. That's what I think.
Yeah.
That's what I think. But fair enough. I accept your point. I accept your point. Okay, so under no circumstances it's going to be a deal. For all intents and purposes, Russia's going to keep pushing.
Yes.
And under this model, they would have to take all of Ukraine.
Eventually, yes. I assure you, the Kremlin still does not want that. But at the end, that is what they will be forced to do. Because the West will not allow them to do anything else. And there are people in the bowels of the deep state in the U.S. who are like, oh, we didn't beat them. Well, fine. Let's see if they choke on Ukraine. They will attempt to bleed and to choke Russia on their quote-unquote victory, because it's, again, pretending like it's a good thing that Russia has had to do this is wrong. It is only the least bad of bad options,
right?
And they're leaving them with this sour, fruit, this bitter pill that they're going to be forced to swallow. And again, people don't want to look to this because it is such a negative feature. But Russia won the war in Syria and lost the peace. And they will hope that Russia chokes on the peace in Ukraine as well.
And that means
Be
guerrilla war.
that over decades. Yes. Okay. So the European leaders are quite clear on this, right? Whether we're talking the political leaders, the military leaders, the intelligence leaders, look at their statements over the last, particularly the last, say, 8 months or so, but really even longer than that. They expect that this war will roll into the next war. They all say that they expect to be at war with Russia in 10 years, in 5 years, and recently that rhetoric has now become settled on 2 years. They expect to be at war with Russia. Now, they put it in terms that Russia is going to invade NATO, which, of course, is nonsense, right? Both countries have both sides, if you will, because there's more than one country involved here, have strategic deterrence, right? That's just not the way it's going to happen. And it's quite clear from the statements, the recent statements of Macron and Starmer and the the yappy dog leaders of the Baltics and everything, that they're going to put troops in Ukraine at some point. And if not in Ukraine, then in Moldova or somewhere else along Russia's borders, right? That is where the conflict is going to, I shouldn't say occur, because that's where the conflict is going to start. It will not end there, of course. It cannot end there, right? But they will put troops in Ukraine or Moldova, or if there's another regime change attempt in Belarus, that's possible. Georgia, again, those not right now, but there's who knows what the political situation is 2 years down the road. And of course, Russia will not accept that, right? They started this conflict, right? You can argue that they didn't really start the conflict, that the West did when they overthrew the government and then attacked Donbass. Yes, okay. But they began their special military operation to prevent NATO in Ukraine, right? Or Ukraine in NATO, right? They're flip sides of, the same coin. And they will absolutely go after Western troops if they're in the borders of Ukraine. Absolutely. And that is where the conflict then becomes a wider conflict. And they know it, and we know it, and it's all just a game up until then. The one reassuring thing to me is that Europe is still not, and to an extent the United States as well, is not apparently able to, right, or lacks the political will to ramp up their military industrial complex to begin to try to, catch up to Russia. They're not, right? That could give you some hope. You could hope that there is complete across the board political regime change in European countries and in the United States of a kind that we can't see right now, that throws off the center-right, center-left shuffle in places like Germany and France and the UK and the Netherlands and Italy in a way that has not been able to happen thus far. I politically, I don't see that, right? I mean, the AfD can increase in the polls. The National Rally poll can increase in the polls. Until they themselves get over a 50% majority, they're still not going to take power, right? Because the political structure it's a managed democracy. There are certain things it is designed to prevent. And if everyone, smaller than them unites to keep them out of power, then, that is the way it will continue to work. as it has in Germany and France up until now. There's still quite a bit of stress in that. Between 25% and 50% is double the support, right? So unless that happens, then that this is something that we're looking at as another inevitability. They are not going to accept Russia's victory. They won't. They won't. There will be no peace settlement. There will be no signing of papers. There will be no Treaty of Westphalia or Yalta or anything like that. It is not acceptable to the West because they understand that U.S.-led Western global hegemony is on the line here. Not in terms of their states, but in terms of the idea of Western dominance of the world, right? Of Western hegemony, of Western primacy. Yes, it's U.S. led, but they are quite appreciative of their vassal status, with it, privileged vassal status within that hegemony, and they cannot give it up. They will give it up, and they see surrendering to Russia in Ukraine, because that is what any settlement would be, is not something they can do. And just like Syria, where there was no end to the conflict, not in diplomatic terms, right? There was a frozen conflict with the U.S. and their Kurdish proxies parked out in East Ukraine, the Turks and their Al-Qaeda proxies parked out in, Syria, in North Syria, and, the Syrian government, Russia, Iran, and Hezbollah in the rest of Syria. And then, you could say the really interesting part starts, and that Ukraine is going to, in some respects, follow that same pattern. Le Monde just put out a piece this weekend, I think for the first time, by a Western, a French political expert, saying that, well, if Putin won't stop from the threat of putting Western troops on the ground in Ukraine, then we need to really put Western troops on the ground in Ukraine. And a statement that makes absolutely no sense whatsoever.
No,
but
it's not.
you cannot look at that from a position of logic and reason, because they are not looking at anything from a realist sense, right, of the strategic balance between the two countries, or the two sides. Yes, Russia has all the military advantage in the world. And yes, if they put troops on the ground, they would be mauled. But then they believe that would only ultimately, inevitably, draw the U.S. into that conflict because of, the network of NATO alliances. And then, they would finally have the big guy in the fight. And they're willing to go all that way over Ukraine. And that means that Russia needs to be prepared to go all that way in Ukraine and beyond.
You think the big guy is interested in getting into a nuclear war with Russia?
I don't think it matters. I think there are institutional and geopolitical constraints here that impel both sides to the same strategic position.
So the big guy gets in regardless of what the big guy wants.
Yeah. I mean, if you're talking the big guy, if you mean Donald Trump, yeah, he doesn't have the power now, much less down the road when Russia is moving on Kiev, right? He doesn't have power now.
He's just a weak
just
man.
One man. He is. He's
no,
a figure.
He's a weak president.
He's a weak president. The U.S. president doesn't have that. He constantly is under threat from bipartisan support in Congress, putting a sanctions bill, sanctions tariffs bill of Lindsey Graham's bone-crushing sanctions, if for 1 second they fully believe that he's not committed to conflict with Russia the way he should be. I mean,
Right.
that kind of threat is there. The deep state, the institutions of the Pentagon, the intelligence services, the CIA, the deep state, right? The whole blob, right? The military industrial complex. The president is only one man. All right, if you count JD Vance, that's two, and the vice president isn't worth that much power-wise, right? I mean, yeah, he can break a vote in the Senate, but it's not even going to come close to that anyway. He doesn't have that much power. And yes, I've said from that, Donald Trump obviously has nothing but contempt for Zelensky. And he personally doesn't care much for Ukraine. And we know that he can't stand the European liberal leaders, and they can't stand him. They hate him, right? All of that doesn't matter because there are institutions with their DNA written in certain geopolitical things. And the president doesn't have the power. No one man has the power to go against that. And Donald Trump, the venal, quixotic, mercurial creature that he is, certainly does not have the political vision or fortitude to do that, right? I mean, he hasn't been able to do anything in that regard thus far. I'm going to go to war with deep state in the U.S. And then the next morning you wake up to find that Donald Trump is smoking a cigarette in bed with a dozen different members of the deep state, right? I mean, that's what we discovered.
Oh God, have you seen South Park's video of Trump laying with Satan smoking a cigarette? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Look, as a war planner, I would agree that you would have to prepare for the worst. I would agree that a war, especially with Europe, is likely. I would agree that the U.S. probably wants to feed Europe to the Russians. That I agree with. Whether the U.S. gets involved, that's the rub. Let me ask you this. In relation to China, for example, the U.S. has been trying to pivot to China for the last, decade, if not more. So would the thought be, okay, we need to finish off Russia before we go to China? And do they expect China to just stand there and not do anything under that context?
They can hope whatever they want. That's the what it will come to at the end of the day. Yes, they want to pivot. No president has been able to do that since Obama first iterated the need to pivot, right? They always get stuck in the Middle East and now with Russia and Eastern Europe. And, Donald Trump has laid it out. Pete Hegseth, in particular, laid it right out, the new division of labor. And Kellogg has iterated the same thing. Look, the world has changed, and the U.S. cannot take on Russia and China and Iran and others because evidently they need to make enemies of Venezuela and everyone else as well at the same time, right? So they call the team together, right? Like the football locker room, and they say, look, here's the game plan. This is the new division of labor. This is the new strategic sequencing. We can't do all of this ourselves anymore. So Europe, you've got Russia. Israel, you've got Iran. We're going to go straight for China. That's the way it's got to be, right? You got to man up. You got to take on your share of the burden for this hegemony if you want it. And the truth of the matter is the Europeans aren't capable of dealing with Russia.
Exactly.
And the Israelis aren't capable of dealing with Iran. Exactly. And the U.S. is going to be drawn into one or both of those. The only way this war doesn't happen is if the U.S. instead gets involved in a war directly with Iran in the Middle East, invades Iran, like on the ground,
which
seems kind of insane, right?
No.
But that's the only way, right? The war is going to come. The question, and the war, to my mind, in Ukraine against Russia, right? Or again, if it doesn't come to the direct conflict in Ukraine, then it will in Moldova, because inevitably this conflict is going to involve Moldova at the end, by the end of it as well. They're replicating the exact same thing they did in Ukraine and Moldova. If not here, then in the Middle East, or, again, someone that could do something stupid and decide that now is the time for Taiwan to declare independence and make it so, and then that could kick off there. But the war is going to come one of those three places, right? And then, the question is, if it comes off in Eastern Europe, right, in Ukraine against Russia, then does China just sit there, right? Does China send troops to help Russia fight NATO, right, in Ukraine? No, of course they don't.
Yeah.
They can go for Taiwan. Right? That's what they do. That is, the Gotterdammerung moment, right? That is how they help Russia. By then, it's not so much taking advantage of the opportunity, because the Chinese certainly don't want a conflict there either, but then it will become a matter of geopolitical survival, because they will know that if Russia is defeated with direct conflict with US and NATO in Ukraine, which, by the way, is far from guaranteed. In fact, I would venture to say that it's far more likely to go nuclear on the Western side first, because they will be, at least in that place, once again, at a conventional disadvantage for the type of weapons needed for that conflict, right? Just as they are now being, filtering it through Ukraine. There'll be a much bigger air war component, but Russia has the entirety of its air force, right? For all intents and purposes, the size of the Russian Air Force has only increased since the conflict in Ukraine, right? And their air defense has proven itself. And the U.S. Air Force will have to fly into the teeth of both of that. It will be a new game, but it's another game that I think that in that place, Russia will also win. Right, because it's in Russia's backyard, and the U.S. has to fight that fight, on the other side of Europe. But China will understand that if Russia were to fall, then that the game would be up then. So they can't let that happen. So at some point in that conflict, the decision will be made. Well, things are looking tight. We need to open a second front, and that will be there, right? Or Iran, the same thing. They could not, of course. They could choose not to. It's not worth it. If we're not in World War III already, that would be World War III. They could back down and say, no, maybe the U.S. will exhaust itself, and then let Russia win or lose by themselves. But then that would be, in my mind, the ultimate betrayal of the multipolar world, but that will be a real politic
answer.
Question point.
None of this makes sense. I got to be honest with you. None of this makes sense. Let me explain why. If we were in World War II, then okay, I get it. You're talking about conventional forces that are going after each other, and a win or loss doesn't destroy or end the world.
Yeah.
This war is ultimately nuclear. Russia, under no circumstances, just like the U.S. policy, by the way, would allow itself to be defeated by NATO military because it has nukes. The U.S., under no circumstances, or even the nukes that are in Europe, those things, as you point out, would fly, meaning there is no winning this conflict. It's just an ultimate loss. Unless you know a way to win a nuclear war, which I'm unclear on.
No, at some point over the last decades, and it has, I think, reached its fullest only in the last 3 years. But the West, in particular the United States, but the Europeans as well, they have lost the self-survival instinct, the fear of nuclear war. And Russia keeps trying to punch that home to them. And then they keep, Putin swinging his nuclear, phallus around, right? That they don't fear it. Right. And everything they have done in the last 3 years, and Russia has not replied, right? Not only not with nukes, but not even against them, has only convinced them that they can push it and keep pushing it, and it will never have an end. Right. Why? Because Russia shows restraint and that fear of World War III, of a nuclear conflict, and they don't. It's happened again and again and again. They think they can go all the way with it and beyond, and they will. Why? Because no one has disabused them of that notion. That is why, yes, Russia has kept within that box that they're winning, right, by not responding to provocations to go beyond it again and again and again. But eventually that has worked for them. They're continuing to win in Ukraine. But eventually they are going to be forced to go outside that box, right? The West will just go too far. And putting troops in Ukraine is definitely one of those things.
Wow. That is,
there's just an inevitability to all of this. That it is, if you understand, one, the ideological drive behind the West, right? For them, this is ideological. I mean, Putin recently made comments about it's not ideological. He's wrong. From the West, it is absolutely ideological. It is not from the Russian side. Not anymore, right? Not since the self-dissolution of the Soviet Union. But for the West, the ideology is Western exceptionalism, right? It's the variant of American exceptionalism. This supremacist, messianic belief that they are structurally, societally, and above all, morally superior to every other country, people, and civilization on the face of the earth, and that at the end of the day, they have not only the right, but the duty to extend their control over the whole world because they're the good guys, right? That's what they tell themselves. And that is the most dangerous ideology on the planet today. And Russia, China, and Iran all understand this. Iran maybe a little bit less than the other two, but they're coming to the conclusion. However belatedly, they're realizing this, you're dealing with crazy people. You're dealing with people who are not dealing from a cautious, realist, power balancing, mentality. You're dealing with people consumed with liberal ideology to its ultimate conclusion.
why? Is it because the Russians fought the Great Patriotic War and the number of people that they lost? So it's grounded in their experience. And
sure.
grounded
There's also the fact that they've come out the other side of an ideology that also, preached that needed to be spread to the rest of the world. They've been disillusioned of those ideological. In different terms, China has moved beyond the ideological constraints of a communist system whose tatters they still, clothe themselves in, even if in reality it's not there, right? China is only it only has the tatters of a communist state. It is not. It is a realist based nationalist Chinese state, that is more than anything. At the end of the day, if we have to talk in moral terms, driven by ancient Chinese civilizational Confucian values, because it's written into their DNA. And to a certain extent, it always was.
Yeah, that is not the way we experience the world. I mean, I can tell you I live here, right? Even the way that the media reports it, they report it in the context of with freedom and justice, Superman being our icon, right? We may have excesses, but those excesses don't besmirch us morally. What we do is morally correct. And we're the good guys. That is the way we talk about it. That's the way it's discussed. That's the way it's reflected back to us, even though we do horrible things. So it's like a country can say
for good purpose. At the end of the day, it's for the greater good.
That's what they say. But when you get Madeleine Albright on TV and they point out, hey, you guys have basically killed 500,000 babies. Is that okay? And she says, yeah, I think it's for the best.
Without hesitation, before or after that statement.
That's astonishing.
That was,
right?
That was an illusion-shattering moment of the nature of this beast. Yes.
But it wasn't, which is my point.
Oh, it was for us. It wasn't for them. It was for us. It was for you. It was for me. It was for most of the people out there watching this, right? You know, who know what we're talking about. But that moment was, yes, the mask, the creature under the mask was revealed.
Yeah, that was an astonishing moment. I put it that way. That was an astonishing moment. That was very honest of her. Without any consequences for doing so, and consequences for saying that. And I guess that's the thing that terrifies me. I think you're right. I think it's kind of the Hitlerian ideology, right? Where it's a triumph of the will. Yeah, we don't have the material resources in order to do this, but we'll figure it out. And you get
there was a statement in the first George Bush administration that was attributed to Karl Rove about the nature of reality. We're an empire now, and when we act, we create our own reality. And while you're studying that reality judiciously, as you will, we'll act again, creating other new realities, which you can study too. And that's how things will sort out. We're history's actors, destiny. And you, all of you, will be left to just study what we do. That's where they're playing from.
Yeah, but that doesn't work in practice. I always say reality asserts itself. It's kind of like when this war started. And I would say, Ukraine is losing. This looks bad. And the Western media would be like, Kursk was fantastic. This shows Zelensky still has it in him. And I would point out, reality would assert itself. It always does. It doesn't care about your beliefs. It doesn't care about.
It doesn't, though. While the dollar is the U.S. global reserve currency, that reality does not assert itself. Right?
For now.
The U.S., at the end of the day, has not lost much in this conflict. Yes, their Pentagon stockpiles are down precarious low, particularly in air defense missiles, but that's actually the result of several different conflicts. But they have not paid a price. Even Europeans have only seen, shall we say, a marginal lowering of their standard of living. They have not suffered in this conflict yet. And until they do suffer, reality will not assert itself because it has not been brought home to them, right? To remember the way that the New York Times spoke of Ukraine flying drones into Russian business skyscrapers in Moscow City, right, 2 years ago. They spoke of it in approving terms as Ukrainian, despite the fact that these were obviously not in any way stretch of the imagination military targets, because it was Ukraine bringing the war home to Russians. Well, until the war is brought home to Americans and Europeans, that reality will and has not and will not reassert itself.
But if you're right,
by then it will probably be too late, because then we'll be in the nuclear game.
It's that part. That's what I'm saying. If you're right, it will assert itself.
Yep.
Meaning there will be.
It'll be too late, though. At that point, it'll be too late.
I'm just saying it will. I'm not saying about where time frame. I'm just saying it will. I mean, at some point, they will be disabused of this idea of Western supremacy and all this other nonsense.
I'm sure you've read the reports that they now intend to put intermediate range strategic capable missiles in Europe, right? Germany intends to buy, right? The Typhon system that will allow nuclear tipped Tomahawks to be launched deep into Russia from German territory. And Russia, according to some reports, unconfirmed, that one of the reasons why the U.S. is now getting so excited about Venezuela is that Russia is planning on countering that by putting Oreshniks in Venezuela. Now, I
Whoa.
can't confirm,
Woof.
but
Whoa.
I mean, I'm sure you see we're in a Cuban Missile Crisis,
Yeah.
playover there, right?
But you need that. Look, I know people are going to say, whoa, what do you mean? You need that. You need leverage. Like, there's no way. The U.S. believes it's untouchable. There's a line in what is his name? The Three Body Problem book, where one of the scientists points out, he says, I always believe that there will be somebody at the table that's untouched. He said, I got that wrong. Everybody's going to be touched by this. The U.S. believes it's untouchable. They believe, as you pointed out, with this division of labor, that they can feed the Europeans to the Russians. That's what they believe. In our DNA, we believe it. We believe that Europe is just Ukraine in expanse. What happens when that's not true? Now, I guess the terrifying part of this is you ended up with somebody like Donald Trump at the helm as opposed to JFK. But otherwise, how do you gain leverage? How do you make it clear you will be touched?
Why is that terrifying? Because if Trump was JFK, he really would be dead now.
Mark, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Having somebody with competence as opposed to somebody without is a very big deal. Those things are different. JFK, who made the speech, said we need to understand the Russians. We need to understand where they're coming from. We need to understand that 80% of the Nazis
killed him for it. And they
killed him for it, but he did it, is my point. He was competent in a way that we haven't had a competent leader in a very long time. These people are ideologues, as you point out. That's a terrifying reality that we're stuck with. What am I getting wrong? What am I getting wrong?
You're not. I'm simply pointing out that if there was such a person, they would kill him, right? Because it's the institutions, right? It's this whole. It's not just one person. It's not one secret cabal of transnational or Jewish, leaders pulling the puppet strings. It's not the Illuminati. It's not the Bilderberg group. It is something much harder and at the same time more prosaic and harder to understand. It is institutions where entire classes of people are ingrained with certain beliefs and worldviews. And that is the belief system, that exceptionalism, right? That foreign policy aspects of that exceptionalism that is DNA coded into the blob, into the U.S. foreign policy and security. You can say the elite, but really it's the entire establishment, right? Yeah. From root to branch. And it's just, you can't uproot that. You can't. I mean, the only thing that can uproot that is things like, a decades-long occupation of Japan and Germany, right? I mean, that is, that type of military defeat and subjugation, right? Or maybe Great Depression style mass economic suffering and deprivation across a country that could lead to serious political changes. It is only, these type of shocks, right? If we're talking in, Naomi Klein's terms of the shock doctrine, it is only at those times that radical changes of the institutional political situation become possible.
Are we currently in the beginning of World War III?
Oh, yeah. We probably have been since 2008.
Why 2008?
Because that's the August War. That's the war. That's the Georgia War, right? Because what happened in Georgia was just a rehearsal, right, for what's happening here, right? Because NATO said we're going to bring Georgia and Ukraine into NATO, right? Putin warned in his 2007 Munich speech, famous, don't do this, don't go down that road. In 2008, they did. They had their neoliberal strongman coming to power in Georgia on the color revolution, on the Rose Revolution, and they went for broke, and Russia stopped them cold in Georgia. And Georgia was a much smaller country, and it was over in a matter of days. And they didn't have the ability, they didn't share a European border with Georgia that they could flood the country with weapons and money and everything. It was just too far from their geopolitical hold in the South Caucasus at the time. So, but that is when it started, right? Everything. Then we had the war in Syria. We had the war in Libya. And now we have, since 2014, the replay, the Orange Revolution didn't rewrite the Ukrainian DNA. So they needed the Maidan to make sure that the results of their geopolitical flipping of Ukraine weren't just reversed, right? They had to lustrate and pogrom and ban all of the political opposition, meaning all of the political voice of East Ukraine, needed to be excised so that in the next election it just wouldn't have been reversed again as it was after the Orange Revolution, right? They needed to hardwire that into the new, anti-Russian, pro-Western Ukraine. They had to make sure that there couldn't be a political revisiting of the Maidan Putsch, and they did. And Russia stood by, hoping that there would be a political settlement with the West, the Minsk agreements, and he has since admitted that was my biggest mistake.
I'm curious on something. When the last defensive line falls, Slaviansk, Kramatorsk, and whatever line they come up with that is going to fall apart pretty quickly. I don't think they even have the time to do it, frankly, but okay, whatever that line is, what happens?
Then they simply continue. They will already prepare to set up a proxy government, a shadow government first, maybe in Lvov. If not in Lvov, then in Poland or Brussels or New York or what's it? Nova, Northern Virginia, right, somewhere there they will set it up. Right, and we know all of this because before Russia even intervened, as the New York Times and the Washington Post reported, they were training Ukrainian special forces for a guerrilla war, right? They were preparing for what comes after this before this started.
I guess what I'm getting at is the Russian military just keeps going. Because governments in exile don't matter in real terms. I mean, that's not like facts on the ground issues. I guess what I'm getting at is that last defensive line falls. The Russian military pours into the rest of Ukraine. Ukraine doesn't have a defensive line to stop them.
Okay. So I'm not so sure the analogy of water pouring in is correct because, again, it's in military terms, sure. Right. But remember that occupying Ukraine is a very big country. Yeah. And to physically occupy all of Ukraine, every town, settlement, and so forth, Russia has enough troops on hand, right? The current system is enough to take the Donbass and probably everything up to the Dnieper River. Probably. But if you're thinking Odessa and Kiev and God forbid West Ukraine beyond that, then that is not going to be enough. Russia's going to have to call up its reservists, right? It's got a pool of 2 million reservists, right? That it can call on. It won't have to go to the civilian population until the final war really starts with Europe. But that will still have all kinds of political and economic costs. And Russia won't want to do it. The Kremlin doesn't want to do it. The Kremlin desperately hopes that they can force a political settlement on the West, that they will cut their losses and They will not do it. They will not accept it. It's not going to happen. They'll force Russia to choke itself on all of Ukraine, to overextend itself, right? It's baked into the papers. You know, you've read them, Rand Corporation as well. There's the inevitable geopolitical, the strategic logic of this has been worked out a decade in advance, right? I don't know if you've read or watched The Foundation,
Yes.
right? Yeah, it's like psychohistory. You can see the possible pathways, right? It's not quite that power of prognostication on that level, but all of this has been planned out before, and we're just playing through a script now.
What happens to Zelensky? I always say he's a man with no future.
Who cares? True? Who cares?
Actor played his role. He can leave the stage.
Yep.
Does he know he's playing a role?
I mean, what happened to Juan Guaido? What happened to him?
Who's that?
Yeah, who's that? When's the last time you heard from Svetlana Tikhanovskaya? Or, for that matter, what happened to Bashar al-Assad?
All of these people, or let's say all of these articles in the West are talking about Zelensky taking over, saying that they want a political change. Solution is their guy. Now, I got to be honest with you. I don't know the difference between the two. Short of...
I do. What's
the difference?
The difference is that Zelensky is a committed ideological Banderite. And
you don't think Zelensky is?
I think he wasn't, like Poroshenko. He was someone else who then was forced to internalize, right, the ideological and far right underpinnings of the regime that he inherited. Right, he has since internalized it, but he wasn't that way when he began. I mean, there's plenty of videos out there of him talking about how ridiculous the Banderites were, how East Ukrainians should be able to speak Russian, how Russians and Ukrainians could never go to war because we're the same people, right? You know, he said all of that at one point, and then obviously, he internalized all of this because he became the head of the institutions, right? And he was forced to do so at some level. And now I just think he's mad. I mean, I don't think, his own people have told Time Magazine they think he's delusional, right? That he's the emperor with no clothes. I think at this point he's been broken by ideologically, mentally, emotionally. He's broken. So that's why I say it really doesn't matter. But Zelensky, no. Man, that guy had 2 busts of Stepan Bandera in his military office. Not just 1, 2, because 1 bust of Stepan Bandera is not enough. Another of Roman Shukovich, and the big black, red and black Banderite banner spread across the whole back wall of his military office. Don't tell me things will be any better or there'll be any diplomatic settlement with that guy at the helm. Right?
Well,
he is chilling in veritable political exile from Zelensky, at least in London, commenting how Russia can be defeated with an army of robots. I mean, that is, high tech. That is where, he's not talking peace. He's not talking hard concessions. No, he's talking the army of robots and underground boring machines that will defeat Russia. Right?
One of the Azov members did an interview, and he pointed out, he says, look, even if we had 100,000 men, it wouldn't make a difference. There was another interview that took place, I think it was in the Times magazine, where the guy was like, the Russians are trying to kill me. And he says, Zelensky knows that if he makes any deal or any concessions, it will be a betrayal, and they will string him up in a heartbeat.
They've said that repeatedly from the beginning. It's been said openly online. There's not really, the Western media can choose not to acknowledge that, because to acknowledge that would be acknowledging, the reality of who they've been backing in all of this, so they can never admit that. But yeah, it's been said plenty of times by enough of these top right-wing commanders.
It's can't get his name out. If Zaluzny, Valerie, and Zelensky are effectively similar at this point. Valeri, thank you. Zaluzny. If they're so similar at this point in the way that they've internalized all of this, then what's the point of the change? Is it just a new person at the helm? Is it just to try to? They know Ukraine is against the war. At this point, you got like 69, 70% saying we want it to stop, even if you have to give up land. And so,
I mean, sometimes you just want to remake the same movie with a different person who's almost certainly going to be worse than the original, right? There's an impulse to that, right?
Yeah.
That's why you continually have in, domestic politics, you have this idea of a government reshuffle to put a few new faces in there, right, that are in charge of the same institutions. And, 2 years down the line, you'll see that absolutely nothing has changed. But, it provides for a degree of political PR reset.
Mark, I see the logic of your point of view. I hope you're wrong.
So do I.
I hope
so do I.
Corner that we turn. I hope there's a magical door. I don't see it right now because I agree with you.
I've got a magical a magical wardrobe back there, and if I open it up and I go past the fur coats, I'll find myself in Narnia, right?
I
read that book as a kid too.
Life is weird. Sometimes there are corners we don't see, and hopefully there's a corner. I don't see it right now. I mean, I got to be honest. I don't see a corner for a lot of things. I think the U.S. is going to collapse at some point. I don't think you can run in contradictions forever and expect good outcomes.
I sincerely hope you're right there, that the U.S. collapses at some point too, because that will be the only way, favorable to me that's out of this.
Yeah. Mark,
sorry for you, but I'm out of it.
Yeah, sucks for me, right? But we create chaos. It's just an agent of chaos. And you can look at any war around the globe, and there's a U.S. element or contingent egging it as like an enzyme, egging it along. And there's this good question of, okay, would these countries or would these places act this way if the U.S. wasn't involved? Look at Syria. Syria is a great example. I mean, they're trying to create political chaos in Lebanon while egging on Wahhabis and Israelis to effectively attack Lebanon.
If they could get firm control of the entire state, they would. But yes, chaos is an acceptable plan B because they're perfectly positioned to exploit it. Yeah, they're okay with that as a plan B.
I'm saying that's all around the world.
Yes,
it's all around the world. Mark, you are fantastic. Thank you for this. Mark Sleboda, International Relations Security Analyst. You can find Mark on Boosty, Boosty. If you put in Realpolitik with Mark Sleboda, or just put in Mark Sleboda, his name will come up. This is a droplet of his knowledge and information. Definitely check him out. I always say you're the best in the biz, Mark. And I mean it. I really do. Thank you for this, man. You be safe, okay?
Thanks for having me.
Bye-bye. All right. Mark is fantastic. It's dark, but it's fantastic. I mean, it's hard to kind of quibble with the logic of it. I've said on more than one occasion that the Europeans seem like they're perfectly okay with forcing Russia to take all of Ukraine with the idea that they can have a guerrilla war for 10 years and manipulate and effectively use that time for their own ends. Because otherwise, it's hard to explain the delusion. It's not like they're looking at the same information saying, hey, this is going great for Ukraine. It's not that. And if it's not that, you have to ask, then why are they pushing what is obviously a lost conflict and a lost war? Why are they so adamant about that lost conflict and lost war, even to the detriment of their own societies? Why are they so adamant? And you just are stuck with this reality of, A, they don't care about Ukraine. B, they're willing to fight that war to the last Ukrainian. C, they believe that Ukraine is a massive country that Russia would have to overextend itself to take. And D, it gives them time to do whatever the hell they think they want to try to do in a militaristic sense, to quote unquote confront the Russians. So It's that. It is that. But I want to bring my next guest on. I am joined with the man himself, a favorite of mine to talk to because Caleb is just, you know some of everything about some of everywhere. Caleb Maupin, speaker, writer, journalist, political analyst, and author. Caleb, oh, also the Center for Political Innovation. That is the organization that Caleb works with, and if I'm not mistaken, created. How you doing, Caleb? You doing okay?
I'm great. How about yourself?
I am doing all right. Black pilled, but I'm doing great. A question for you. Venezuela. Venezuela is mind-boggling. President of Peace is looking at war in multiple theaters, continuing the war in Ukraine, trying to initiate a war in Israel. I'm sorry, in Iran, and trying to initiate a war in Venezuela. It doesn't come across as the president of peace to me. Or
Well,
correct me if I'm wrong.
I mean, that thing is very interesting because Venezuela has long been a target of the United States ever since, Hugo Chavez was elected, the anti-imperialist leader, took the country toward 21st century socialism. Marco Rubio in particular, he is a Miami Cuban. He's in with that crowd that is very much obsessed with opposing socialism in Latin America. And Trump has moved the military, the fleet, close to Venezuela. And that's what set off the alarms. And then that caused Fox News and the entire Trumposphere to just go into an anti-communist, anti-Venezuela overdrive, etc. But I noticed a very interesting message from Laura Loomer. And Laura Loomer is just an awful Zionist within the Trump camp. But did you see her statement about Venezuela?
I did not.
She said that she knows that this is fake because the USA is currently negotiating with Maduro to free the hostages in Gaza, and that apparently Maduro is functioning as a back channel between the United States and Hamas. And that this whole event is just completely fake. And as far as she's concerned, this is just, Fox News is not representing what's actually going on inside the White House, and that she doesn't appreciate it and all of this. And she, Laura Loomer would know. She's apparently pretty close to the president. She's not a great person in a lot of ways, but she maintains that actually Maduro and the White House are working together to get the hostages free. So I saw that and I was like, that's interesting. The main thing that I've noticed that's weird about Venezuela is that, it's 4,000 U.S. Marines that are off the coast of Venezuela, right. 4,000. Venezuela has Bolivarian militias of 4 million people ready to fight them. So if you're going to invade the country and they got 4 million people armed and ready to protect it, in addition to the standing military, you're going to need a lot more than 4,000 troops. So what exactly is going on here? China says they've got Venezuela's back. Russia says they've got Venezuela's back. Iran says they've got Venezuela's back. So for Trump to actually jump in, he's going to need a lot more than 4,000 troops. So yeah, this whole thing is just very, very, very odd.
So all right, so this is what Rubio said early on. I'm going to play this clip because this gives context to what's in these people's minds. As you pointed out, they were trying to get Venezuela for a very long time. They put a $50 million bounty on Maduro's head. There's that, and now you have 3 warships off the coast of Venezuela with air power and everything else.
Agreed to have elections. The elections were completely fake. They leveraged migration against us to get those concessions. And now they have these general licenses where companies like Chevron are actually providing billions of dollars of money into the regime's coffers. And the regime kept none of the promises that they made. So all that needs to be re-explored. Because in Venezuela, you have the Russian presence, you have a very strong Iranian presence. The Iranians, in fact, are beginning to build drone factories for the manufacture of Iranian drones in our own hemisphere. Not to mention the long practice of the Venezuelan regime of providing real but illegitimate passports to operatives for Hezbollah in our own hemisphere. And lastly, and I leave it lastly to Cuba, agreed to have elections. The elections were completely fake. They leveraged migration against us.
So part of what Rubio is trying to argue here is just mind-blowingly hypocritical. Now, I used to make this argument that if the Russians overthrew the government of Mexico, put in missiles, raised the military. You have Mexico saying we're going to take part of our country back, all this stuff. The United States would go bananas. The United States would not take the position that, well, Mexico is an independent country, it can do whatever it wants. If it wants to build up a huge military at the border, it can do that. They're a sovereign state. They would never say that. Rubio, and I'm saying that to say the Russians going in for the special military operation into Ukraine, they're like, oh my God, I can't believe they did that. We don't care if they were killing ethnic Russian Ukrainians. We don't care if Ukraine was building this huge military at the border. Meaning, this is a similar situation that Rubio is trying to portray, with the United States taking a completely different action. I'm saying the hypocrisy is off the table, off the scale. The other part to this is the Russians, the Chinese, the Iranians are also in Venezuela helping Maduro. We don't like it. And we don't think the elections were legit. Again, I don't know why that's U.S. business, but whatever. And so now you have this, what seems to be a potential and threatened military action against Venezuela. Even if it's just 4,000 troops, the level of air power and whatnot the United States can bring to bear is astonishing. We have a magnificent capability of murdering people. So I feel you, 4,000 is not a lot. I agreed. I have a hard time believing that they're there with Venezuela being a back channel to Hamas. I don't even see the links. I don't see the connection. It's a world away. What am I missing in this, if that's true?
Well, I mean, it's awful, obviously, to threaten Venezuela the way Venezuela is being threatened. And I mean, this is a neocon. In particular, we saw in Trump's last administration, they came about as close as they'd ever come to straight up invading Venezuela. You'll remember the food truck incident, right? Where they basically, and it was like a false flag in real time. I mean, before the whole world. So they had this food truck on the Colombian border. They were going to cross into Venezuela, and they lit their own food truck on fire. And then they reported Maduro lit the food truck on fire. Now we have to invade. And there was like literal video footage showing that it was them who lit their own food truck on fire. And the New York Times and others ran with it. And I guess it was Gray Zone who was out on the scene and actually filmed that it was the New York Times who it was their local people who lit it on fire. So they didn't light their own food truck on fire. And, they weren't able to go in and invade. There have been many coup attempts in Venezuela against the, government of Maduro, and they've failed because the military is very, very loyal to Maduro. And they have tried a lot of provocations. Things were the worst probably in Venezuela in terms of the food crisis, et cetera, in 2015, right as Obama was leaving office. That's when I visited Venezuela, and I was there at the height of that. And yeah, they're just not going to be overthrown. And it's just not going to happen, right? Maduro is very strong, and he's a very effective political leader. And he's gotten the country through the worst of it. And their economy is growing now, and the food crisis is over. They're producing their own food domestically. They've got a good relationship with Iran, with Russia and China. And their economy is getting stronger, and their oil production is increasing. And that seems to be what many people suspect is the real reason for this threat, is that oil production in Venezuela is rising significantly at this point. And so they're a competitor on the oil markets in a way that they hadn't been for a while, right? Because of the sanctions, because of everything. It looked like for a while they were not really competing with the United States because the sanctions had such a devastating effect. Now they're competing again. And so, you heard what Marco Rubio said there about Chevron. These oil companies are bringing money into the coffers of the regime, right? And it's like, yeah, Venezuela is becoming a competitor again. They're a competitor on the oil markets, right? And they got to be put on their place, just like Russia is, a huge oil exporting country, just like Libya was the top oil exporter in Africa before it was destroyed, just like Iraq under Saddam Hussein was a big oil exporting country, just like Iran is a major oil exporting country in the Middle East. It's like they don't want competition on the energy markets, and Venezuela is a huge oil producing country, and they took control of their oil resources with Hugo Chavez, and they used oil and energy revenue to rebuild their economy and make their economy very, very strong during the early years of the 20th century. And so then Obama dropped the oil prices very dramatically starting in 2014, and you had the oil price drop. And there was hope that they could overthrow Venezuela during that time. They had La Salida, and they had all these campaigns and all these celebrities talking about, oh, we got to bring down the regime, but it didn't work. The people stood by it. And then things in Venezuela have been getting progressively better since then. And there was a big try in Trump's first administration that completely flopped, just didn't work. And now we're in Trump's second administration, and they've got some troops there. And what I guess I should say, disappointed with is seeing people in the Trump camp that should know better, people like Alex Jones and others, just kind of, performatively putting this on, and that this is very much, I'm somebody who comes out of the left, and I'm pretty hated in leftist circles, but I come out of the left. That's my political background. And I hear the way Trumpers talk about communism. I mean, every podcast you've ever heard from a conservative, I could make a conservative podcast, a Jordan Peterson, Laura Loomer, Candace Owens podcast right here. This is all you have to do, right? Is you start talking about woke people being annoying, right? Which I agree with that part, right? Woke people can be very annoying, right? As you start talking about woke people being annoying, then you just pull up some old Cold War communist, communism killed a gajillion billion people, and everywhere that's ever had communism has been starving and all of that. Woke people are communists. Democrats are woke people, are communists. That's very bad. That's the level of political education that goes on the right. And with that level of political education, I mean, that's just, there's so many things wrong with that. I don't know where to begin. I mean, I've actually been to Marxist, Leninist, and communist countries. They're not woke in any way. I mean, it just doesn't match, right? So that doesn't line up at all, right? But that's your typical Trumpers education. So Venezuela is literally, a Marxist government. They quote Marx and Lenin and, Stalin, and, they consider their revolution to be modeled on the Cuban Revolution and Che Guevara and stuff. So, Trumpers are psyched up to hate communism. They think Biden's a communist. They think, college kids that talk about pronouns are all communists. And so it's part of the conservative script. And it's disappointing to see because, a lot of a lot of the right-wing populists are critical of war in a lot of ways, but they've just been, spoon-fed this brainworm about communism. And it's frustrating to see. So, yeah, I mean, I look at this and I just, I'd be happy to, argue with anybody about it, debate people about it if they want. Yeah, I mean, what they think they know about wokeism, what they think they know about communism is absolutely wrong. And it has nothing to do with Venezuela. There's no gay marriage in Venezuela. Did you know that? Abortion is illegal in Venezuela, right? So it's like you're trying to tell me that the college kids that you hate as a conservative are the same as Venezuela. And that's why the USA should invade them and have a regime change war. I mean, you're just wrong. I mean, they don't know what they're talking about.
I mean, I don't get the argument for invasion at all. What business is this of ours? This is the Iran thing, right?
Right.
Why?
And they're all concerned about refugees, right? I mean, how many, you think we have problems with people coming over our border now? Imagine if you overthrow and destabilize a government, a major government in South America. If a country like Venezuela gets toppled and all the people are fleeing and there's instability and people and all of that. I mean, and the claims about a narco state. Oh,
that's what I want.
Yeah, that's
just to interrupt for a moment. That's what I wanted to hit with you also.
Yeah.
So the New York Times, I could pull up the article. It's like, well, the Trump administration says it's concerned about drugs flooding into America. And so Trump will do any and everything in his power, including using military force, in order to go after states where they believe that this is a drug cartel, and claiming that Maduro is the head of that drug cartel. And so we have a $50 million bounty on his head to try to remove him from office. Oh, and by the way, here's a military at that border.
So we invaded Colombia first because that's the major source of cocaine, right? Colombia. And then we invaded Guatemala, which has been run by drug cartels. We invaded Honduras, that's been run by drug cartels since Hillary Clinton toppled the government in 2009 and removed Manuel Zelaya. I mean, then we invade. I mean, it's like Venezuela, of all the countries in South and Central America with a drug problem, Venezuela is like the last one that you should consider the source of the problem. Are there drugs in Venezuela? I'm sure. Are there people that use them? Sure. Are there criminal organizations? Probably. But of all the countries in that region, all the countries south of the border that have a drug problem, they're probably the last one that should be on the list. So, I mean, that's, anyone who knows anything about what's going on there, I mean, a lot more drugs are coming here from Colombia. A lot more drugs are coming here from Honduras and El Salvador and Guatemala. I mean, this is I mean, yeah, that's just it's very selective, right? Venezuela's got oil, is what they've got. They not much cocaine coming out of Venezuela.
What is so? This is an infographic that was put up online trying to show this massive oil reserves that are under Venezuela. And as you point out, this is direct competition with the U.S.'s oil, all things being equal, and getting your hands on oil is getting your hands on oil. If you can knock over the government, put in some kind of stooge, have a military presence or have a U.S. presence there that can effectively exploit the resources, then obviously they want to do that. Kick out China, kick out Russia, kick out Iran, etc. So there's multiple reasons, right? All of these go into U.S. quote unquote interests as a justification for doing this, with drugs being the stalking horse. That's the mask that is over the actual reality of reasons for going after Venezuela. I am curious on this other thing too. When you were what was your experience in Venezuela? Because I've never been. I've never had the opportunity to go. What is the perspective of people towards Maduro? Because I've heard multiple, let's say, points of view on how Venezuelans view Maduro and whether or not they will be willing to back and support the Venezuelan government if indeed the U.S. took some kind of provocative kinetic action against the government.
Well, the USA has already done that multiple times, but I mean, I'll tell you, when I was there in 2015, it was a time where they were having a real hardship because Hugo Chavez had died. Nicolas Maduro had come into office, elected as his successor, and Obama had dramatically dropped the oil prices, and they were having a rough time. And I was there when the National Assembly, the parliament, kind of went over to the opposition. They voted in the opposition in the National Assembly. But even then, and this is what I wish people could understand, even then, I did not hear people saying they wanted to have capitalism. I did not hear people saying they wanted to go back to the way things were before Hugo Chavez. I talked to Venezuelans, many of whom who voted for the opposition, and they said, we're socialists too. We are just frustrated with Maduro. We want things to be, we want Maduro to operate this way. We're frustrated with corruption and nepotism in the ruling party, and that the people who voted for the opposition, they were not anti-communist or anti-socialist. It was just they were frustrated with Maduro. They were sending a message to Maduro. They were frustrated. And then there was a solid core of people that are loyal to Maduro till the end. And that was made clear to me. There were people that, when I went to Central Caracas, to the colectivos and the communes, there's a layer of, very, very poor and dark-skinned indigenous folks who really, until Hugo Chavez came along, these folks didn't have literacy. They didn't have anything. They didn't have electricity. And those folks will go down fighting till the end. I interviewed a woman in, khaki military pants who had been a homeless child. And, you talk to those folks, there's a layer of people there that are really, really loyal to Maduro. And that's why he's in power, right? You can talk about like a third, and I've noticed a lot of these countries that are anti-imperialist are like that, right? And it's kind of an interesting way of doing things, but it's like, there's a third of people, I would say in Venezuela, that are anti-Maduro, that, that they watch Western media, they consume Western television and stuff, and they think, oh, Maduro's no good. They believe what they see on Western television. Then there's a third of people that are like, you know what? Maduro's better than what was here before. He's doing an okay job. They're not like huge enthusiastic supporters, but, they see that the country has improved, the literacy programs or whatever. They might have their complaint about this or that, and they're not really that involved in things, but whatever. And then you have a third of people that are just really, really enthusiastic supporters that live in a collectivo, that live in a commune, that are, work in a job, maybe in the government sector. They're a member of a labor union that is pro-Maduro affiliated. And those folks will go down fighting to the end. They're a part of a Bolivarian militia. They go out and practice shooting in their neighborhood, and they're part of a neighborhood community militia. And they've got a picture of Che Guevara or Fidel Castro in their house, and they are ready to, they're saying, stay out, Yankee, and bring it on, and those folks. And that's why Maduro is still in power. It's kind of interesting, right? It's like you have a layer of the population that are just fanatical and ready to die for it, and armed and militarized and involved in this kind of, huge network of government supporters that's been built, right? I mean, they have these Bolivarian circles in every neighborhood. That's what one of the things Hugo Chavez did, is he built these Bolivarian circles, and that really Maduro relies on this very well organized network of people who are very, very dedicated to the revolution and very dedicated to carrying out the policies of the United Socialist Party. And because of that, he's able to stay in power. And that his inner circle, there have been a couple attempted coups, but people don't go for them. The military of Venezuela is trained in Cuba, which is very interesting. They send the soldiers to Cuba for their military training. And the military is probably the most pro-government section, the most pro-Marxist and socialist wing. I mean, is that part of their education is they learn all about the Cuban Revolution, they learn all about Fidel Castro, and the military is basically kind of a bastion of anti-imperialism, and the military is very solidly behind Maduro. They were with Hugo Chavez. Chavez was a paratrooper. He came out of the military, and that they're pretty solid as a state. And if they were going to fall, they would have fallen in 2015. I mean, that was the moment where they didn't have toilet paper, where, you know, that they were having trouble importing food. That's when they were really suffering in 2015. Now things in Venezuela have really, really gotten better. I will say that the opposition, it's kind of interesting. The opposition in Venezuela had to do kind of a rebrand, and Barack Obama was a really big part of that, because there is a layer of people, Marco Rubio, the people he hangs out with, they're never going to come to power in Venezuela. They're just the most hated. You know, there's a lot of very, very light-skinned, wealthy, anti-communist people in Latin America. They're a minority now, especially now that, you know, the people that, you know, didn't, it used to be that indigenous folks didn't vote. People that lived in the countryside, they didn't vote. The reason Hugo Chavez and Maduro were able to kind of rise in popularity is because big sections of the population that were kind of locked out politically, they were just kind of illiterate and living in the countryside. Now those folks have literacy, they have electricity, and they vote. You know, and so the demographics have changed. And there's a layer of, like, you know, people that are at the top of South and Central American countries that are light skinned, that are wealthy, that are obnoxiously racist, obnoxiously anti-communist. And that used to be who America aligned itself with in the region. And those folks are outvoted. And they're never, and there's a guy named Leopoldo Lopez, who's a big, you know, oppositionist associated with Venezuela. You'll hear CNN talk about, oh, he's being persecuted and all that. He will never win an election. Those folks are really, really obnoxious. And I mean, when you listen to them talk, I mean, they are just, you know, they're always going to, they're hated by the majority of the population. They are blatantly classist. You know, when I was in college, you know, Lula da Silva was the president of Brazil. Yes. And there were a number of, you know, kind of wealthy Brazilian students at my college. And I remember I asked them, I said, well, you know, what do you think of Lula da Silva? And they said, oh, he's horrible. Can you believe this? Oh, he's the worst president Brazil's ever had. Did you know that he used to be a UPS delivery man? He delivered packages. Oh, Brazil, people think we're a poor country. We got a UPS delivery man as our president. Oh, he's horrible. And I said, well, you know, I said, that, okay. And they said, well, I said, if he's so bad, why does he win the elections? And they said, because all these people who have no business voting vote, because in Brazil we have this law that everyone has to vote, and so all these people who haven't graduated high school and all these people who aren't smart like us, they go out and vote, and they shouldn't be voting. They don't understand politics. And I said, okay. And I said, well, why do they vote for Lula da Silva? And they said, because he gives them all jobs. He uses the government, and they all have jobs now, and so they thank Lula da Silva for it. And it's like, you know, it's like that, those kind of folks, right? That used to be who America lined itself up. There's a layer of people from Latin America that are like that, right? Where it's just their argument against Hugo Chavez was that he was part Afro-Venezuelan, right? He has, you know, Afro-Venezuelan heritage. Oh my God, we can't have that, right? You know, and that he was a paratrooper. He wasn't a general or something. He was a paratrooper. He's from the, you know, they're just classist, right? They kind of did a reboot with Henrique Capriles and with some of the new folks. And, you know, we have this president of Colombia, with this president of Chile, where they've kind of like created a new layer of people that talk left, but are not anti-imperialist, right? Nicolas Maduro is a solid anti-imperialist, you know, and Hugo Chavez was, you know, supporting Iran, was supporting China, was solidly anti-imperialist. Now they've created kind of a fake left of Latin America, right? That is not anti-imperialist, but also doesn't talk the way those people talked, right? That says, okay, yeah, we need to help. We need programs for low-income people. Yeah, You know, we need to, you know, have concern about, you know, people that are impoverished, but Maduro's a dictator, but, you know, Russia and China are bad. America's got problems, but we can work with them. And that was really what Obama did, is he kind of changed who the USA was supporting in Latin America to supporting like a layer of like foundation funded, like fake leftists, rather than that obnoxious Latin American right wing that is just so hated throughout the continent. That is associated with a huge body count, right? I mean, you know,
these people are fascists.
I mean, Pinochet rounded up 20,000 people in a sports stadium and tortured them, you know, when he was brought to power. The Contras of Nicaragua, they're, you know, talking about drug dealers. They're the people that brought cocaine to the United States, but they also killed, you know, thousands and thousands of people. They targeted the Catholic Church because it was not sufficiently anti-communist, and murdered priests and nuns. You know, I mean, there's all kinds of military dictatorships that the USA backed in Latin America, led by those folks. Those folks are just widely hated. So the traditional hard right wing of Latin America is out of favor. Obama maneuvered the United States into supporting kind of a fake left rather than supporting them. And that was kind of a game changer, but it still didn't result in toppling the government of Venezuela. It was very effective in destabilizing Bolivia, though. Bolivia, you know, Evo Morales.
I was about to mention it. God, I was about to mention it.
Okay,
Yeah,
go ahead,
Evo Morales and the removal of him, and the
Mhm.
fascists effectually taking over.
Yeah, and that you know, Latin American politics you know, has significantly changed, and that, you know, in the 70s and 80s, the USA backed a lot of these brutal military dictatorships. Cuba was backing, you know, kind of insurgent armed groups in the countryside that were fighting against those brutal military dictatorships. But after the fall of the Soviet Union, there was a change in tactics where the focus became on building kind of a united front against neoliberalism. And that's how you got the election of Hugo Chavez. That's how the Sandinistas got reelected in Nicaragua. And you had an explosion with, you know, the Kirchners in Argentina and with Evo Morales. Most of that's been rolled back, but Venezuela is solid because they took control of the military. They took control of the state. Nicaragua is also very solid for the same reason. They took control of the military. They took control of the state. But these other places where you had kind of socialists and leftists elected, Rafael Correa in Ecuador and elsewhere, they've been kind of pushed out, you know, by this kind of tactical maneuver that Obama engineered.
That is, yeah, the Honduras, the Bolivia thing was rough. I remember when it happened, and they were dragging people through the streets and everything else. And, you know, if you ever go, like Ecuador is another one where you have an indigenous community that is somewhat separate from the political space. And you may get, let's say, one or two good leaders in, but for the most part, you have drug cartels that are effectively taken over. You have the dismemberment of the state. What happened to Ecuador? God, man, that sucks so bad. I was there, maybe 5, 6, 7 years ago, maybe a little bit longer. Beautiful country. Oh, beautiful country. People were nice as can be. Yes, the heights of the mountains and everything else in Quito were a bit rough, but you get used to it. And then to find out, having guests on who live there, like executions of political figures, drug gangs that have run amok. I mean, it's such a sea change from where it was to where it is now. And so, yeah, I feel you on this. Many of the indigenous communities, whether in Mexico, whether in, I guess, all throughout South America, is marginalized on some level. They seem to hate the political leaders that bring in the indigenous community into the political space, whether that's in Brazil, whether that's in Bolivia, or whether that's in Venezuela, I suppose. Yeah. I need to get into their mind then. 4,000 troops is obviously not enough to take over Venezuela. So what the hell is going on? If you had to guess.
I mean, it looks like they want something from Venezuela. This is a threat, right? They want something. They want Venezuela to do something. But also there seems to be a war going on within MAGA, right? And let's also talk about that, because it appears that, you know, when Trump bombed Iran, Marjorie Taylor Greene was not thrilled about that. Obviously, Thomas Massie wasn't thrilled about that. We had, you know, Elon Musk, you know, had his kind of falling out and is no longer part of the Trump coalition, even though he was an essential part of Trump getting elected, you know. And then now we have Tulsi Gabbard. You know, she revealed that Russiagate was a complete hoax, that Russiagate was a fraud. And that laid the basis for Trump to start the negotiations in Alaska. And those negotiations started, but then Zelensky stopped them. Zelensky basically wouldn't make any concessions. So they're, but they're still going on, right? They're still, in place. But as of now, there's not any plan for Trump to set up a meeting between Putin and Zelensky. Zelensky is kind of stalling things and is kind of holding that up. And in that context, all of a sudden we have U.S. Ships going towards Venezuela, and we have Alex Jones and a lot of the Trump camp, beating their chest about communist regime in Venezuela, so awful, just repeating standard, anti-communist stuff of the Marco Rubio variety. And then we have China condemning that and saying they've got Venezuela's back. Russia saying they've got Venezuela's back. All of Venezuela's allies saying we've got your back. And I mean, I think that what's happening is that there's a war within MAGA. There is disagreement within the Trump administration about how to move forward with a lot of things, and that this is kind of the push and pull. And that this is like Trump is saying, okay, well, I'll threaten Venezuela. This is what the hawkish folks want. This is what the Marco Rubio crowd wants. He's throwing them a bone. And he's, continuing these negotiations with Russia, but then, and that there's a number of different forces within the Trump administration trying to get what they want. And that this is some kind of negotiation. And that's what makes me a little bit concerned. And I'll just throw this out there, right? I talked to people who were at January 6th, and they thought January 6th was just going to be a regular protest in Washington, D.C. And, one thing led to another, and all of a sudden people were in the Capitol and then people were in prison. And we know that January 6th was basically set up so that they could have an excuse to have a crackdown as Trump was leaving office. You and I have both been to Washington, D.C. You can't just walk into the Capitol in the middle of a protest. That was kind of set up to happen. And Charlottesville was a similar thing, right? Some so racist social media influencers thought they were going to just have a little rally, that it'd be surrounded by police and there'd be a bunch of protesters around them. And all of a sudden it went viral in all the Trump spaces, and a lot of, got a huge amount of publicity. And all of a sudden, people were coming to counter protest it from all over the world. And a bunch of people got taken to a spot where what would have been a small incident became a very, very big incident. And that was to create a narrative about Trump being a Nazi, et cetera, right? And that I am very, very concerned about two particular groups right now that need to be very careful, because if there's anything that'll set the negative side of MAGA going, it'll be some kind of false flag. They almost need some kind of January 6th or some kind of Charlottesville to psych the public up against them. And that is, I would urge the people in the anti-Israel wing of MAGA, the Nick Fuentes fans, the Candace Owens fans, and others, be very careful, right? Don't get set up, because I feel like they very much, if they can set up some kind of situation where those people are bad, those people are anti-Semitic, if they can set up some kind of situation that can turn the tide, in favor of the Laura Loomer, pro-Israel crowd. And I also would urge people, there's a layer of people that are communists now. They call themselves communists, that are very vocally like, we are communists, waving red flags. They just have the communist identity. They're out there kind of, playing the character of communists, so to speak. I urge those people to also be very, very careful, because that is, the entire right wing has been psyched up in this narrative of communism is the enemy. And I've noticed that there are a couple groups that are kind of out there just kind of very publicly, waving hammers and sickles and stuff. I worry about them also being used in some kind of false flag to set the stage, because, you need a boogeyman, basically. The way they did what they did after January 6th was they used Trumpers, QAnon shaman, and QAnon and all of that as the boogeyman. They need a boogeyman. So don't be the boogeyman. Don't let them set you up in a situation where they can create kind of an incident. And that is my concern, because if I was in the Trump, camp, and I was in the pro-Israel, pro-regime change, pro-overthrow Maduro crowd, I would realize the only hope we've got is we got to stage some kind of false flag to just make the people who have the opposite position the most publicly hated. And I think that they may actively be planning to do something like that. And so I would urge people in both camps, both, people that are really into communism and both people that are anti-Israel, MAGA, be very careful. Don't get set up because that seems to be the only hope they've got. That's really the only thing they can do to really push MAGA in a pro-war direction is they need some kind of, incident where they can just publicly demonize and make the people, that take the opposite position just widely hate it. And I mean, I will say Nick Fuentes is despicable, right? And he plays a very negative role. He's foul-mouthed. He's very openly racist. And the problem is that young men who listen to Nick Fuentes, they think that opposing Israel is great and showing that the Republican Party is beholden to Israel and all of that is great. And, he says good things about no war with Iran, etc. But then, you start listening to Nick Fuentes and you act like an asshole. And nobody likes an asshole, right? And that, I've met young men who get into the Nick Fuentes thing, and they just start acting like assholes because they kind of get pulled into this internet bubble where that's a funny, neat way to act. Everyone's gay, everyone's a faggot, everyone's, this is racist words and all of that. But it's like, you're an asshole to 90% of humanity who's not part of your little internet bubble. If you talk that way, you are an asshole. If you act that way, you are an asshole, and that Nick Fuentes gets people in this little bubble where they act like assholes and they become very, very obnoxious to almost everyone else they're around,
Agreed.
And, it's very weird. And that Nick Fuentes targets Marjorie Taylor Greene. Now, if you're Nick Fuentes, you're an anti-Israel Republican, you would think Marjorie Taylor Greene would be who he absolutely likes. But he calls her Large Marge, right? And calls her fat, right? He brings up stuff about her, like she had an affair, or I don't even know what happened. Stuff about her personal life that I don't give a shit about. You know what I'm saying? But he brings that up, right?
His issue with women.
Yeah.
His issue with women. He really does. The Candace Owens interview is a really good example where he's like, I don't need you as a woman telling me that. And it's like, whoa, dude, what's your issue? And he pointed out, he says, who's going to like Nazi Nick Fuentes, basically saying a woman would never touch me and all of this other stuff. Like he has issues with women that is ever present. It's very weird. It's very bizarre.
Psyching up young men to think the way he is a good way of doing things, and that it's like he is not a friend of his own cause, right? If his job is to, build a mass movement of Republicans that oppose Israel and oppose Israeli domination of the Republican Party, he's doing a very, very bad job of it. And in fact, he's making young men who take that position as unattractive and isolated as he possibly can. And I see him as a very, very negative force. I just don't think Nick Fuentes plays a good role at all.
Job.
Yeah.
I mean,
and
I don't think Nick Fuentes, I'm sorry to interrupt. I don't think Nick Fuentes is in it to build a coalition against Israel.
Yeah.
I think Nick Fuentes is in it for a business model, and he's able to bring in a group of incels like him that can see the world in a particular way and that functions in that way. And you can build a coalition in order to have a living in a channel. I think it's that. I don't know if he's in it for the cause per se. And I mean, correct me if I'm wrong.
No, I think you might be right. And I think that there are other forces that are using him. This is a way to control dissent. And I've noticed this, Angela McCurdle of the Libertarian Party is someone I really look up to. She organized the Rage Against the War Machine Party, or the Rage Against the War Machine demonstration in Washington, D.C. and all of that. That was like the best thing the Libertarian Party has ever done, in my opinion. But in order to do that, who was her main opponent? All these libertarian influencers, all these podcasts and YouTube channels by libertarians that are kind of like Nick Fuentes. I mean, they're not, racist in the way that Nick Fuentes is racist, but they call themselves libertarians, and they talk about gossip and rumors, and they harass people and all of that. And oh my God, you can't do Rage Against the War Machine. And they had like a whole campaign against Rage Against the War Machine, demanding this speaker be removed and demanding that, and then, and in a lot of ways, these people were accommodated. Speakers were pushed out to please them and stuff, and they still didn't support it, right? And it's just like, this is how they control dissident spaces, is they kind of create these and I don't think these people are paid agents or whatever. I think they just find people and they use social media to manipulate, and they create a layer of like shock jock kind of people that dominate certain dissident spaces that declare war on any real organizing, any real serious effort to change things. They go after, and they just create this fandom on the internet, that of people talking trash, and they're concerned about building their fandom, building their audience. How many clicks and shares am I getting, etc. And that's what they're concerned about. They're not concerned about actually building a movement that'll change the world. In the lead up to the Rage Against the War Machine, there were so many of these influencers that were speaking there. And I didn't speak at Rage Against the War Machine, because we were official endorsers and sponsors of it. But, I figured, there was so much drama. It's just whatever. We had a reception afterwards, and, but I was in touch with various influencers. They were all texting me about, oh, they're mad this other influencer is there. Oh, this person shouldn't be there. They're cringe. And I can't be seen with this person. I'm at a rally with this person. And it was just all this personal vanity of like, who am I going to be seen with? And that'll then cause people on the internet to say I'm this or that, and I won't get as many likes. And social media is one of the most effective mind control operations we've ever seen. It really is, right? And that, like Charlottesville, when they did the Charlottesville alt-right rally, it was just a collection of influencers. There was no like organizations there, right? It was just a collection of influencers from the alt-right who mobilized their audiences to get there. If you look at, influencer politics is very toxic, right? The internet brands are not political organizations, right? And that the state knows what they're doing. And the people who build very popular internet brands, they're artificially boosted. They have troll farms of people who pump their stuff out there and all of that. And they're not sincere, and they're just building internet brands. They're not building real organizations. And that's a problem in libertarian circles. That's a problem on the right. It's a problem in communist and left spaces. It needs to be acknowledged for what it is. And that, this is all very, very dangerous, I would argue, because these, social media, you don't know where that Patreon money is coming from. It could be coming from anybody, right? And you don't know, and a lot of these forces, they're not concerned about who's using them or who might be nudging them. They're concerned about their income, which is coming from social media, the revenue coming in, and they're concerned about beating some other influencer who's a rival of theirs. And they have little fights among themselves that are not serious. They're just about, I don't know, they're substanceless. They're about, I'm good, you're bad. I've dabbled in this milieu. I had a debate with Maoist Rebel News, Jason and Ruhe, and I started the debate, and I was trying to start the debate by saying, like, what do we want people to learn from the debate? He didn't want to talk about the debate. He just wanted to talk. He wanted people to learn that I'm bad and he's good from the debate. That's 90% of this streamer bro stuff, is no one learns anything. There's no real politics that's being learned. It's all just, I'm the good influencer. You should buy from me and not from the other guy. And this guy's a pedo, and this guy's a Nazi, and this guy's a, and it's just, it's substanceless. It's about personalities. It's not about politics. Nobody learns anything. And it's a big problem.
Forgive my deep cynicism on this. Forgive it.
Yeah.
Please forgive it in advance.
Yeah.
I have done the internet for like a decade. In fact, they always say, well, Jamal is an OG. And I was like, well, dude, I don't know, 100,000 subs. How can you be an OG, right? I will tell you, it's the same pressures that are on building a business are the same pressures that are on YouTubers. You would know this too, just because, like you said, you've delved into this. You need to be able to support yourself. You need to be able to, the audience may hate me saying this, but the audience is a fickle mistress. And depending upon your brand, quote unquote, meaning what is this person known for? Whether they believe it or not, whether they're true believers or not, what are they known for? Are they on the left? Are they on the right? Are they libertarian? Are they socialist? Are they whatever? You can't go against your brand. You could, but that is going to adversely affect your business interests. So on some level, your brand becomes your business, and you fit within a lane because you've grown people around you around that brand. So it's not like I'm selling hotcakes, right? Okay, I have a hotcake formula. People love it. They're buying my hotcakes. If I change my hotcake formula, maybe they don't buy it. Maybe they do. Maybe they don't. I have no way to know. But those hotcakes in this particular case, and the ingredients of those hotcakes is your political identity. Those people, when they are like, oh, I don't want to associate with this person, they're effectively saying my audience will hate the fact that I am on stage with that person, and it would somehow ding my brand by being so. Now, if your whole point is, look, I want political change and I want to function in this way, then you don't care, right? You go on that stage and you make that case and you come back to your audience and explain why. And if your audience has been there for a long time and they know you, they will forgive you for it. But the fact is, they need to forgive you for it. It's not just the person can function outside of the box to which they've created for themselves and the audience to which they've brought around to themselves. The audience is a fickle mistress. Sites can be destroyed. From their point of view, I earn my money in this. I build my house in this. I pay for my car in this. I pay for my kids in this. I pay for et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I get your take. I understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
That these people are acting as if they want some kind of political movement and acting as if they want to see some kind of political change. But everything that they're doing runs counter to the political change that they vocally say they want to see.
Yep.
I'm saying they don't care about the political change. It's all about brand. That's what I'm saying. The overwhelming majority of people who you see online are doing the job. No more, no less. That's cynical. I know that, God, man, I know that's cynical. And I know that sucks. Because you would think that, well, that guy said he's a libertarian. And that guy said he's pushing for these things. And then when he gets the opportunity to do something to show it, he's against it. And it's like, okay, well, why is he against it? This makes no sense.
Yep.
It's a brand. It's the way they make money. It's the way they earn. I don't know what's in Nick Fuentes' heart, so don't get me wrong. Candace Owens, I always thought she was playing a role, if I'm being bluntly honest with you. Yeah, I don't take these people as being anything but YouTubers.
Yeah.
That sounds horrible, but it's true. And I agree.
That's why my organization, the Center for Political Innovation, we are not a brand. We are a real organization. We get real stuff done. And if you look at the end of every year, I go over like we did this, and we are not a brand, right? I might get a little bit of income from the streams or whatever, but it's not the primary source of my income, and it never will be. And we're building a real organization to get real stuff done. And we don't want to be an internet brand. We want to be a network of people to carry out real operations for anti-imperialism. That's why we sponsored the Rage Against the War Machine rally. That's why we've been having those big demonstrations to support Ibrahim Traore. We've been out in the streets with banners of Ibrahim Traore. That's why, I'm headed to Detroit. I'm going to be distributing in bulk, thousands of copies of this book, Who Are the Houthis and What Are They Fighting For, at the Palestine Convention in Detroit this weekend. So cool. Yeah. Me and Noah from Boston, we're making the drive and we're headed to Detroit to distribute those pamphlets. We're trying to build a real organization. And building a real organization is something that gets you targeted in a lot of ways. I mean, the state is much more threatened by that, if you build a real organization than if you just are on the internet talking, right? And I mean, the internet is rigged, right? It's rigged. And that's the thing is like what you said about it's a brand and all of that. And what's so scary about that is like, it's not simply the power of the market. Our enemy is sitting there, at YouTube, and they can decide. So if you're building a brand and your whole thing is about building a brand, you're putting yourselves, I mean, it's not even the power of the consumer with their dollars. It's the power of the enemy sitting behind the control room at YouTube or in Twitter and deciding. And we saw what they did during the elections. We saw, it's been revealed, the Twitter files, our enemy has total control over who goes viral, who doesn't, and all of that. So, it is frustrating that people that are in dissident movements that call themselves libertarians, call themselves socialists or communists, you're literally letting your enemies pick your leaders for you. That's what you're doing. If you follow who's popular on the internet and you judge that, you're literally letting the enemy pick your leader for you. I mean, that's what you're doing. It's not simply, who's popular online. It's that you're not just trying to please the crowd. You're trying to please the controllers, behind,
algorithm.
The algorithmic controllers that sit there. And it was revealed, they revealed in congressional testimony, Elon Musk released the files. They were deciding certain people, got suppressed, certain people got promoted. The FBI was sitting down with Twitter and making decisions. So that's something these people really should think about, right? I mean, there's a reason that certain brands are suppressed and certain brands are built up. And that's why Nick Fuentes is really concerning to me. And I'm telling people that he may lead people in a very, very dangerous place because that's what needs to happen in order to psych up the Trump base for regime change wars or turn people in the Trump camp to be more pro-Israel, et cetera. So I'm urging people to be very, very cautious. That's what I'm urging them to do.
One thing before I let you go, there seems to be friction between, God, man, there's so much in that that I want to touch. The Communist Party, Jason Hinkle is in Moscow.
Okay, whatever.
Yeah, leading the Communist Party apparently in the States.
Yeah,
and
whatever.
you get, what is his name? The Tricontinental Institute, Prashad.
Okay.
Prashad. I can't think of his name. It's like
BJ
Prashad.
Prashad, yeah.
Yes. He even comes out and says, look, I regret going to this event or going on this show. I didn't realize how much friction this was creating. I got to be honest with you. I didn't even know who Jason Hinkle was. He just came out of the blue one day and apparently got super popular despite just coming out of nowhere, left field.
Yeah, I have to just stay away from this. I can't touch this. My circles and these circles have intersected in the past, but at this point we don't cooperate with each other. And so I just,
what is the issue with this? Because look, I don't understand.
Well, it's fandom. Like, it's just fandom. It's just internet fandom. That's all it is. And it's not real organizing like we're doing with the Center for Political Innovation. And and I mean, that's just all I can say about that, and that there's been an endless effort to draw me into drama with these people. On the one hand, it's, why don't you just join with these people? They've been endlessly hostile to me. On the other hand, it's, you're, these people attacking and harassing me and attacking, saying awful things about me and spreading rumors and stuff. And it's just, I just really, it's unfortunate, but, it's just, these are spaces I just need to stay away from. That's just really all I can say about it is, at one point I've been friendly to various people, and this is a problem, is that there are various people that I've been willing to work with, and then the internet just, tells them, you're not allowed to, you know what I mean? And that's, and it's like, who's manipulating this? That's kind of what I'm saying, and it's kind of like, whenever anything real comes along, like Rage Against the War Machine or whatever, the internet suddenly says, no, you can't do that. No. So, I mean, if there's a political disagreement between those two forces, that's one thing, but I don't even see it as political. I just see this as brand internet building and drama. And, and it just, I'm building a real organization. We had our convention in Chicago. We had hundreds of people there. We've been in the streets. We were at the inauguration with our only Trump, only peace can make America great again banner. And we have a lot of people, and we led the U.S. delegation to the World Youth Festival. We were there for Uhuru. I mean, the fact that these forces have done nothing for Uhuru, right? And the fact that this is my criticism of all communists in America, Vijay Prashad, other people, whatever, right? Is that there's a group of black socialists. The FBI raids their homes in the middle of the night, indicts them. They're facing 15 years in prison for their speech about Russia, right? And these people did nothing for them. Nothing. They didn't go to their court dates. They didn't raise money. There were maybe some tweets or whatever, and why did they not help them? What was the reason? Well, the internet said that they're the same as this other group called Black Hammer that's been very badly canceled on the internet. And I'm just like, the fact these people can't even defend one of their own. This is a black socialist organization raided by the FBI, not accused of false crimes. They didn't frame them for murder. They didn't frame them for drugs. They accused them of spreading anti-imperialist speech. That should be the focus. Every organization should immediately be out there saying, no, we're going to stand with them, because if they set a precedent to go after them, they'll go after us, and the fact that they didn't do that, the left, the communist groups didn't do that. I mean, they couldn't bring themselves to stand with them because, this on the internet, I heard they're a cult, I heard they're this or that, that just shows how completely toxic, these people are. Right. CPI, I was at their trial in Tampa, Florida. I was at the opening of the trial. I was there with Jill Stein and others. I gave a statement to the press. I was at the verdict, or I was at the sentencing. I was there, with Scott Ritter, with others, giving statements. We had a press conference at the United Nations about their case. I raised their case with President Putin because it's a serious thing. If the FBI and the government can shut down the Uhuru for their political views, that basically, in effect, makes it illegal to be an anti-imperialist. And that was something we should all focus on. These people don't care about that. They're concerned about being internet famous, right? And, so I just, you can't take them seriously. They're not serious. And that's, I guess, what concerns me is that there are a lot of people who think that these organizations are real. They think that these fandoms are real, serious organizations. If they were serious, they would have been supporting the Uhuru movement, and they didn't, right? They're just internet fandoms dressed up as, pretending, in some cases masquerading as real organizations. But if they were real organizations, they would have supported Uhuru, and they didn't do that. So, that's that.
Caleb Maupin.
So
always appreciate you, man. Always. And by the way, I wasn't trying to draw you into
no, you're good.
drama.
You're good.
I honestly know nothing about it, which is kind of why I guess I fell into it and just asked you about it. I know nothing about it. I heard about it from a friend of mine who pointed out that the feds seemingly are after them, or like it's interested in some way.
Yeah.
And so I honestly don't know. I just don't know. Like I'm bewildered by the whole thing. And like I said, Hinkle came out of nowhere.
Yeah.
And I was talking to I think it was Kim Iverson. Kim Iverson said she thinks he's a Fed, but she thinks he's an asset or something like that. And her and I were getting into the reasons why. But
yeah, I just for a while he was friendly to me, and he became very viciously hostile. So yeah. I just whatever. You know what I mean? I don't know what he's doing or whatever, but it has nothing to do with me, and I'm just doing a separate thing. What I've noticed is that, first of all, he's been viciously hostile to me, but then I've noticed that people that don't like him continue to put me and him in the same category, which is bizarre, right? And that, yeah, and it's just like, you realize this person is viciously hostile to me, has said repeated all kinds of nasty rumors and gossip, and attacked me on a very vicious personal level. Like, we're not the same person. I did make a video. I am not Jackson Hinkle. And I know that made people really mad, but I am not Jackson Hinkle. I mean, I am not. I am my own person, and that I continue, it's bizarre, right? On the one hand, his audience, has been psyched up to hate me. On the other hand, people think I'm him. I'm not him. So I'm doing my own thing, and I'm doing something separate. And so,
again, just to be clear, I had no idea that there was beef between you two. I didn't even know that there was all of this is new.
There's no logical reason for it. So yeah, it's just I just want to just stay away from it, because there's no logical reason for any of this. This is just fandom, and it's just silly. So
it's annoying. Yeah. Caleb, you are fantastic. Stay fantastic.
Sure thing.
Thank you for this, man. You always give good breakdowns. Look, I tell pretty much everybody I can agree or disagree with my guests. You give damn good breakdowns. And I thank you for it. And your knowledge of this stuff is always a fascination to me.
Always pleasure to come on. Always great to join you. So
yeah, I always appreciate it. But Caleb Maupin, he is speaker, writer, journalist, political analyst, author. The book that he just showed, Why the Houthis Matter. Where can people get that?
Yeah, it's anywhere books are sold. Who are the Houthis? What are they fighting for? All about the history of the Houthi movement in Yemen.
Who are the Houthis? What are they fighting for? Check the book out. This is just the drop of this knowledge of things around the world. You can also get him at Center for Political Innovation. I need the website for that.
CPIUSA.org. CPIUSA.org.
Okay. Caleb, thank you for this.
Sure
Always
thing.
appreciate it, man. You be safe, okay?
You too. Yep. Bye-bye.
All right. Caleb Maupin, such a great guest. I'm fortunate for him coming on the show. Always appreciate him doing so. Let's go to chats. Since we have come to the end, let's go to chats. Blarg, let's see. Excellent show, Jamal. Love your work. Blarg, I hadn't even gotten into the show yet, but man, I appreciate your what's the word I'm looking for? Your optimism. I appreciate your optimism. Thank you for that. Also, Blarg gifted a membership. Welcome to the family. Welcome to the family. Taharka, I think. America back off Yemen and North Korea. They do not have the courage to fight Russia. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, look, Mark has a good point about ideologues. Ideologues aren't rational people. And racist people, as I keep saying, don't see the world clearly. I know I say it a lot, but it's true. Racist people do not see the world clearly. They don't see the world for what it is. They see it through their lens. And they could say, we don't believe those Chinese people. We don't believe those Russians. We don't believe those, put whatever you want there in a racist context. And they are devaluing and subverting the capabilities of a group purely because of racial reasons. That's insane. This is the Hitlerian thing, right? Oh, we're just going to kick down the door and it's going to fall apart, and the Russians, the Soviets are just going to fall over. Okay, you can think that. You can think that. Reality asserts itself. I still say it. This name is going to give me difficulties. I can see it now. Walzewitz. Oh, dude, I can't do it. I can't hit that last name. I'm sorry. I'll just go with Walzewitz. After this global massacre committed by Israel and all other countries except Yemen, I believe the humanity's existence is optional if this world from now on, in this world from now on, come meteor. I know I've talked about this book a lot because I love this book. In the Three Body. After the Chinese Revolution, one of the main characters, got so fed up that she contacted an alien civilization. The civilization wrote back to her saying, don't contact us. We're conquerors, and your planet will be conquered. I am a pacifist, so I'm giving you fair warning. Don't respond to this message. And she immediately responded to the message, said, come get us. We can't deal with our own affairs. I feel that too. I discount my feelings because you have to, but I feel that too. I get it. I understand where you're coming from. Ezra Santos, I just go with Santos. Nobody gets Gaza back. Nobody get Gaza's back. Nobody get Gaza's back. Okay, I don't know if you mean nobody has their back. I don't know if you mean in context of Yemen, where Yemen is at the very least standing up for them, even at the expense of themselves. I don't understand that tweet that fully, but I thank you for the chat. In fact, I thank all of you for the chat. If you dig this show, you want to support the show, you can do so with PayPal, Patreon, Buy Me a Coffee, Super Chats, stickers, memberships. All of those things are deeply beneficial to the show. And you have my deep appreciation for all of the help that you provide for this channel. Can't do the channel without you. As I've said before, many of these shows are demonetized for seemingly absolutely absurd reasons, but it's the environment to which I operate. So whatever you can give to help the show, you have my appreciation for you doing so. Even if it's just liking a video, even if it's just sharing a video, you have my thanks. You have my thanks. We have come to the end. They've stopped the prayers outside, which I don't hate, actually. I just don't want to interrupt in the show. Last chance in Zionism. Otherwise, invite the aliens. Oh, God, man. I don't want that. We need to get our affairs in order as human beings. And there are some devices that are going to have to run to their limits before it gives up. It's like a machine that is on where the off switch is broken. We're stuck with it. We built the device. The device has to run its course. My hope is that it runs its course before the end of all things. That's my hope. But that's just hope. So, all right, I'm going to end this. I'm going to say like. I'm going to say share. We're talking about aliens now. I'm going to say subscribe. And I will see you guys bright and early. Jamal, the culture will make first contact. Space communists are here. Who said they're communists? What if Hitler won? What if Hitler continued with the technological development? What if, What do you get if you have a world that's fascist and go out in space? I mean, there's nothing to prevent that stuff. There may be natural factors that happen in societies that tries to moderate their behavior from the standpoint of modernity, maybe. But you have modernity on some level now, even though I know it's scarcity. And what do we do with the ability to supply everybody with everything they need? We refuse to supply it. We create scarcity, and we use the technological and monetary power, which doesn't exist, we just make it up, to extract resources that is held by a few and create all sorts of conflicts around the globe, exploiting poverty as a means of paying people to do horrible things. There's nothing to stop that short of it running its course. So I feel you. I agree. I get your point. But I don't know if they're communists. That's my point. All right. I'm going to say like. I'm going to say share. I'm going to say subscribe. I want to thank all of you for the support that you gave to this channel. Like, share the video, and I will see you bright and early tomorrow morning. Be safe all. Have a good one.